Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Gran Torino 2008 Movie Review. Gran Torino is a 2008 drama film produced and directed by Clint Eastwood, who also stars in the lead role. The film features a significant Hmong American cast, a first for mainstream American films. Kyle Eastwood and Michael Stevens composed the score, while Jamie Cullum and Clint Eastwood provided the lead track. Set in Highland Park, Michigan, the story follows Walt Kowalski, Eastwood, a recently widowed Korean War veteran alienated from his family. When Kowalski's neighbor Vang is pressured by his cousin into stealing Walt's prized Ford Torino as initiation into a gang, Walt thwarts the theft and develops a relationship with the boy and his family. Gran Torino opened with a limited theatrical release in the United States on December 12, 2008, before expanding wide on January 9, 2009. It grossed $270 million worldwide, making it Eastwood's second highest grossing film to date. The film received generally positive reviews from critics who noted Eastwood's direction and performance, while it received some criticism for its inaccurate depiction of the Hmong community. Recently widowed Walt Kowalski is an ill-tempered and racially prejudiced Korean War veteran and retired Ford factory worker. His Rust Belt neighborhood in Metro Detroit has become ridden with gang violence among poor Hmong immigrants, including Walt's next-door neighbors, the Vang family. Walt is estranged from his spoiled family, and on his 80th birthday angrily rejects his son's suggestion that he move to a retirement community in favor of living alone with his aging Labrador Retriever Daisy. A chronic smoker, Walt suffers from coughing fits, occasionally spitting up blood. As Walt's late wife requested, her priest, Father Janovich, tries to comfort Walt and persuade him to go to confession. Despite being harshly rejected by Walt, Father Janovich persists. Vang is coerced by a Hmong gang led by his cousin, Spider, to steal Walt's 1972 Ford Gran Torino as an initiation. Walt catches Thao and thwarts the theft. Thao escapes after Walt nearly shoots him. When the gang tries to abduct Thao forcefully, Walt scares them off with his M1 Garand rifle, earning the local Hmong community's respect. As penance, Thao's mother makes Thao work for Walt, performing tasks that improve the neighborhood. The two men soon form a tenuous mutual respect. Walt mentors Thao, helping him obtain a construction job. Walt also rescues Thao's sister, Sue, from being raped by 3 African American gangsters. Despite his initial prejudices, Walt bonds with the Vang family. With his cough worsening, Walt consults a doctor who provides a dismal prognosis, which he conceals. After the gang assaults Thao on his way home from work, Walt physically assaults a member as a warning. In retaliation, the gang beats and rapes Sue, and then injures Thao in a drive-by shooting. Out of fear, the family refuses to report the crimes. The following day, an enraged Thao seeks Walt's help to exact revenge. Walt convinces him to return later that day. Walt buys a suit, gets a haircut, and finally confesses to Father Janovich. When Thao arrives, Walt takes him to his basement and gives him his silver star, telling him that he is haunted by the memory of killing an enemy child soldier who was trying to surrender to him, and he wants to spare Thao from shedding blood. He locks Thao in the basement and departs to the gang's residence. When Walt arrives, the gang members draw their guns as he berates them for their crimes, drawing the attention of the neighbors. Walt puts a cigarette in his mouth, slowly reaches into his jacket pocket, and pulls his hand out quickly. Thinking Walt is brandishing a pistol, the gang members shoot and kill him. Walt's hand opens to reveal his Zippo lighter bearing the 1st Cavalry insignia. Following Walt's direction, Sue frees Thao, and they arrive at the scene. A police officer tells Thao and Sue that Walt was unarmed and that the gang members are arrested for murder. The officer goes on to say that the gang members will be going to prison for a very long time, thanks to witnesses coming forward. Father Janovich conducts Walt's funeral, which his family, his barber, and the Hmong community attend. Afterward, Walt's last will and testament is read. Much to the dismay of Walt's family, Walt leaves his house to the church and his cherished Gran Torino to Theo, on the condition that Theo does not modify the car. Sometime later, Theo drives along Detroit's Jefferson Avenue with Daisy at his side. Gran Torino was written by Nick Schenk and directed by Clint Eastwood. It was produced by Village Roadshow Pictures, Media Magic Entertainment and Malpaso Productions for film distributor Warner Brothers Pictures. Eastwood co-produced with his Malpaso partners Robert Lawrence and Bill Gerber. Eastwood has stated he enjoyed the idea that it dealt with prejudice, that it was about never being too old to learn. Shooting began in July 2008. Vang crew, production assistants, consultants, and extras were used. The film was shot over 5 weeks. Editors Joel Cox and Gary D. Roach cut the film so it was under 2 hours long. The crew spent over $10 million while shooting the film in Detroit. In the early 1990s, Schenk had become acquainted with the history and culture of the Hmong while working in a factory in Minnesota. He had learned how they had sided with the South Vietnamese forces and its U.S. allies during the Vietnam War, only to wind up in refugee camps, at the mercy of North Vietnamese Communist forces, when U.S. troops pulled out and the government forces were defeated. Years later, he was deciding how to develop a story involving a widowed Korean War veteran trying to handle the changes in his neighborhood when he decided to place a Hmong family next door and create a culture clash. He and Dave Johansson, Schenk's brother's roommate, created an outline for the story. According to Schenk, each night he used a pen and paper to write the script while in Grumpy's, a bar in northeast Minneapolis, after working at his day jobs. He recalled writing 25 pages within a single night in the bar. He recalled asking the bartender, who was his friend, questions about the story's progress. Some industry insiders told Schenk that a film starring an elderly main character could not be produced, as the story could not be sold, especially with an elderly main character who used language suggesting that he held racist views. Through a friend, Schenk sent the screenplay to Warner Brothers producer Bill Gerber. Eastwood was able to direct and star on the project as filming for Invictus was delayed to early 2009, leaving sufficient time for filming Gran Torino during the previous summer. Eastwood said that he had a fun and challenging role, and it's an oddball story. According to Schenk, aside from changing Minneapolis references to Detroit references, the production headed by Eastwood didn't change a single syllable in the script. Schenk added that the concept of the producers not making any substantial revisions to a submitted script never happens. Eastwood said that he stopped making significant revisions after attempting to change the script of Unforgiven and later deciding to return to the original revision, believing that his changes were emasculating the product. The original script was inspired by the northeast community of Minneapolis, Minnesota, but filmmakers chose to shoot in Michigan, becoming one of the first productions to take advantage of the state's new law that provided lucrative incentive packages to film productions. Bill Huizinga, from Zeeland, Michigan, who once served in the Michigan House of Representatives, helped write and coordinate the state of Michigan's incentive package to the film creators. The film ultimately received a 42% tax credit. Bruce Headlam of the New York Times wrote, "That helped make it easy for Warner Brothers to sign off on bankrolling the movie, something that hasn't always been a given in the studio's relationship with the director." Producer Robert Lawrence said that while the script was originally set in Minnesota, he chose Michigan as the final setting because Kowalski is a retired car plant worker. Metro Detroit was the point of origin of the Ford Motor Company. Schenk said that sometimes the lines in the movie feel out of place with the Detroit setting. For instance, a line about one of Walt's sons asks if Walt still knows a person who has season tickets for Minnesota Vikings games was changed to being about a person with Detroit Lions tickets. Schenk said, "They don't sell out in Detroit. And so that bothered me. It seemed really untrue to me." Locations, all within Metro Detroit, included Highland Park, Center Line, Warren, Royal Oak, and Grosse Pointe Park. The house depicting Walt Kowalski's house is on Rhode Island Street in Highland Park. The Hmong Gang house is located on Pilgrim Street in Highland Park. The house depicting the residence of one of Walt's sons is on Ballantine Road in Grosse Pointe Shores. The church used in the film, St. Ambrose Roman Catholic Church, is in Grosse Pointe Park. The hardware store, Point Hardware, is also in Grosse Pointe Park. VFW Post 6756, used as the location where Walt meets friends to drink alcohol, is in Center Line. The barber shop, Widron's Barber Shop, is along 11 Mile Road near Center Street, in Royal Oak. The shop, founded in 1938, in a space now occupied by another business, moved to its current location, west of its original location, in 1970. The film producers selected that shop out of 60 candidates in Metro Detroit. According to Frank Mills, the son-in-law of owner Ted Widron, the producers selected it because they liked the antique look inside. Eastwood asked Widron to act as an extra in the barber shop scene. In the area around the barber shop, vehicle traffic had to be stopped for 3 to 5 minutes at a time, so traffic in the area slowed down. Of the entire cast, only a few were established actors. The Hmong actors had relatively little experience, and some were not proficient in English. Jeff Bennon said that Eastwood used a low-key approach to directing. Eastwood said that I'd give them little pointers along the way, acting 101. And I move along at a rate that doesn't give them too much of a chance to think. B. Vang said that he originally felt frightened but was able to ease into the acting. Bennon said that Eastwood was a patient teacher of the first-time actors. According to Vang, Eastwood did not say action whenever filming a particular shoot began. Vang said that he had studied the script as if it were a textbook. According to Vang, after the first film cut ended, Vang did not hear a response from Eastwood. When Vang asked if something was wrong, other people told Vang that if Eastwood did not make a comment, then his performance was satisfactory. Vang added that Eastwood encouraged ad-libbing with the Hmong actors. Annie Her said that she liked the improvisation work, even when she was required to translate between the English and Hmong languages. When asked if the in-character racial slurs offended the actors in real life, Annie said that she did not feel offense. Vang said, "I was called so many names that I can't say here because of how vulgar they were. It disturbed me quite a lot, but at the end of the day it was just a script." Vang said in a 2011 program that Eastwood did not allow the Hmong actors to change their lines, despite what he said in the earlier interviews. Nick Schenk said that he became friends with many Hmong co-workers while employed at a VHS factory in Bloomington, Minnesota. In regard to Schenk's stories of his interactions with the Hmong people, Laura Yoon of Minnesota Public Radio said, "That sense of humor and curiosity permeate the script, even though the Gran Torino trailers make the movie look like, by all measures, a drama." Eastwood wanted Hmong as cast members, so casting director Ellen Chenoweth enlisted Hmong organizations and set up calls in Detroit, Fresno, and St. Paul. Fresno and St. Paul have the two largest Hmong communities in the United States, while Detroit also has an appreciable population of Hmong. Chenoweth recruited B. Vang in St. Paul and Annie Her in Detroit. The screenplay was written entirely in English. Therefore, the actors of Gran Torino improvised the Hmong used in the film. Louisa Shine, author of Hmong Actors Making History Part 2, Meet the Gran Torino Family, said before the end of production that some of the lines actors ad-libbed in Hmong on camera will be tricky to translate back for subtitles. Schenk had input from Hmong people when writing the script. Diane Hang Garvey served as a cultural consultant, giving advice on names, traditions, and translations. Vang later argued that the use of the Hmong people did not seem relevant to the overall plot. He said there is no real reason for us to be Hmong in the script and that even though Walt Kowalski had fought in Korea, he had still confused the Hmong with Koreans and other Asian ethnic groups. In a 2011 program, Vang said that Hmong actors were treated unfairly on the set, and that Eastwood did not give tips on how to build the characters. Vang also claimed other white cast members made Hmong actors feel excluded by assuming the Hmong speakers did not understand English. Vang said that some important lines that the Hmong characters said in the Hmong language were not subtitled, so audiences developed a skewed perception of the Hmong people. Vang, as paraphrased by Jeff Bennon of the Associated Press, said in 2009 that the film's portrayal of the Hmong is generally accurate. Regarding the result, Vang said his film is not a documentary. We can't expect 101% correctness. During the filming, Hmong cast members addressed what they believed to be cultural inaccuracies that were being introduced. Cedric Lee, a half Hmong who worked as a production assistant and a cultural consultant, said that some things were over-exaggerated for dramatic purposes. Whether it was our job or not, I still felt some responsibility to speak our mind and say something, but at the same time, the script was what it was. We didn't make the final decision. In 2011, Vang said while many Hmong had objected to some elements, the producers selected the viewpoints of the Hmong cultural consultants which had the most amenable take on the matter and would lend credence to whatever Hollywood stereotypes the film wanted to convey. Vang further said that this was a white production, that our presence as actors did not amount to control of our images. Louisa Shine and Va Mendaje, authors of Gran Torino's Boys and Men with Guns, Hmong Perspectives, said perhaps the most commonly voiced Hmong objections to the film concern its myriad cultural inaccuracies, exaggerations, and distortion. Shine also said that Hmong actors struggle, too, with their culture being made into spectacle. Even though a real Hmong shaman acts as a Hmong shaman in the film, Shine said that his expertise was overridden by the screenplay and the filming, which distorted the ceremonial scenes by making them inaccurately exotic. Vang said that the tea ceremonies depicted in the film were not correctly performed. Even though, in the film, Hmong characters feel offense when Walt touches a girl on the head, Shine said that in real life in Hmong culture it is okay to touch a person on the head. In other segments of the film, the Hmong shaman touches a baby's head without any negative criticism. Shine adds that Spider touches Thao Vang Lor's head without consequence. Christine Wilson Owens, author of Hmong Cultural Profile, said, most traditional Hmong elders, especially men, do not want strangers to touch their heads, or those of their children, due to their religious beliefs and personal values. Thao and Su Lor wear Hmong clothing to Walt Kowalski's funeral. Hmong do not ordinarily wear traditional Hmong clothing to funerals. Grandma Lor spits a betel nut she had been chewing to show contempt for Walt Kowalski, even though the Hmong do not chew betel nuts. The Hmong shaman reads Walt's personal character, when in real life he would communicate with the spirit world. In the film the shaman himself does a sacrifice of a chicken in a manner that Shine and Dajae say is in dramatic ceremonial fashion, when in real life an assistant would do this perfunctorily. The authors said that the Hoopli ceremony done in honor of the baby has an incorrect spatial layout, that the clothing and grooming of the Hmong gangs is not correct, and the obsequious making of offerings on doorstep are not accurate. While Thao himself cleans dishes, Shine and Dajae add that he would not do this alone because he is in a house with other female family members. Shine and Dajae also add that there is inconsistent use of the two Hmong dialects within one family. They also argue that members of a Hmong clan would not show aggression towards a member of a fellow clan and that they would not rape a member of their own clan, like the gang in the film rapes Sue. Sharon Her, a Hmong writer from New York, argued that the film had confusion of Asian customs and that Hmong people do not use favors as a method of atonement, nor do they endlessly shower individuals with gifts out of gratitude. Her added, an early draft of the script even had names misspelled and referenced Chinese surnames, a sloppy mistake that was easily corrected. In the film's opening weekend of wide release in the US, it grossed $29.5 million. As of 2021, it has taken in $269,958,228 worldwide. The film was released on June 9, 2009, in the United States in both standard DVD format and Blu-ray. The disc includes bonus materials and extra features. A featurette is included and a documentary about the correlation of manhood and the automobile. The Blu-ray version presents the film in 2.40:1 ratio format, a digital copy, and the audio in multiple languages. About 4 million DVD units have been sold as of 2012, generating $67.4 million in revenue. Another 332,000 Blu-rays were sold, for $4.9 million, bringing the total to $72.3 million in home video sales. Rotten Tomatoes reports that 81% of 237 surveyed critics gave Gran Torino positive right UPS, the average score is 7.10/10. The site's consensus states, though a minor entry in Eastwood's body of work, Gran Torino is nevertheless a humorous, touching, and intriguing old-school parable. At Metacritic, which assigns a weighted average score out of 100 to reviews from mainstream critics, the film has received an average score of 72 based on 34 reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale. After seeing the film, the New York Times described the requiem tone captured by the film, calling it a sleek, muscle car of a movie made in the USA, in that industrial graveyard called Detroit. Manala Dargis compared Eastwood's presence on film to Dirty Harry and the Man with No Name, stating, "Dirty Harry is back, in a way, in Gran Torino, not as a character, but as a ghostly presence. He hovers in the film, in its themes and high-caliber imagery, and of course, most obviously, in Mr. Eastwood's face. It is a monumental face now, so puckered and pleated that it no longer looks merely weathered, as it has for decades, but seems closer to petrified wood." The Los Angeles Times also praised Eastwood's performance and credibility as an action hero at the age of 78. Kenneth Turan said of Eastwood's performance, "It is a film that is impossible to imagine without the actor in the title role." The notion of a 78-year-old action hero may sound like a contradiction in terms, but Eastwood brings it off, even if his toughness is as much verbal as physical. Even at 78, Eastwood can make "Get Off My Lawn" sound as menacing as "Make My Day," and when he says "I blow a hole in your face and sleep like a baby," he sounds as if he means it. Roger Ebert wrote that the film is about the belated flowering of a man's better nature. And it's about Americans of different races growing more open to one another in the new century. Sang Chi and Emily Mauberg Robinson, editors of Voices of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Experience, Volume 1, said that within the mainstream media, the film received critical acclaim for its nuanced portrayal of Asian Americans. Louisa Shine and V.A. Mendaje, authors of Gran Torino's Boys and Men with Guns, Hmong Perspective, said that the mainstream critical response was centered on Eastwood's character and viewed the film mainly as a vision of multicultural inclusion and understanding. Nicole Sperling, columnist for Entertainment Weekly, called it a drama with the commercial hook of a genre film and described it further as a meditation on tolerance wrapped in the disguise of a movie with a gun-toting Clint Eastwood and a cool car. Chi and Robinson said that within the Asian American community, some criticized depictions of Hmong men and the archetypical white savior trope that permeated the film. Clint Eastwood's decision to cast Hmong actors, including amateur actors, received a positive reception in Hmong communities. Touger Seong, a Hmong storyteller and performance artist from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area who had auditioned for a role in the film, said that he had respect for the film because the producers actually cast Hmong instead of asking other Asian Americans to mimic Hmong. Seong also argued, "First things first, let's get our foot in the door. Complain later." Diana Hang Garvey, who served as a cultural consultant for the film production, said that the film was not intended to be a documentary on the Hmong people and that it positively highlights, as paraphrased by Laura Yoon of Minnesota Public Radio, the close-knit nature of the Hmong community in Detroit. Duamua, a Hmong actor in the film, said that he had no regrets in playing a gang member, because, in Nguyen's words, gangs consumed his brother's life while they were growing up in St. Paul. Mua added that many first-generation Hmong are affected by gangs and drift into gangs due to a lack of father figures. Louisa Shine, a Rutgers University anthropologist who is an expert on the Hmong culture, approved the concept of Hmong achieving visibility in the popular culture of the United States, but believed that the film may be promoting out-of-date stereotypes of the Hmong. Shine said that her Hmong friends were touched by the film's portrayal of Hmong culture redeeming and reaching out to Walt Kowalski. Shine further added that the film seemed to give little prominence to the history of the Hmong, and that only 2 male Hmong, Thao, and a gang member, were given depth in the story. Shine said, "I feel a lot of the plot about the Eastwood character is driven by the fact that he is a veteran. Yet there is no possibility for representing the fact that the Hmong were veterans too." An individual established a blog, eastwoodmovie-hmong.com, documenting what the author believed to be cultural inaccuracies of the film's depiction of the Hmong. David Brower of MinPost said that some Hmong liked Gran Torino and that many believed that the film was offensive. In 2009, actor Vang said that he was satisfied with the outcome of the film. Brower said that in an opinion editorial released in 2011, Vang isn't kind to the Clint Eastwood film. Chrissy Reyes-Ortiz of the Bottom Line of the University of California, Santa Barbara said, based on Vang's testimony in a 2011 program, that though many of the people who have seen the film may have gotten a sense of satisfaction and joy from seeing that Walt overcame his racism, the people who acted as the Hmong members in the movie did not, and that they were offended by the traces of racism that were included in the movie and that they experienced themselves on set. Some Hmong on internet message boards had posted criticisms of the film. In 2011, Vang said, Hmong around the country were furious about its negative stereotypes and cultural distortions and that they confronted him when he spoke at events. Vang added that he engaged in explaining my obligation as an actor while also recognizing that, as a Hmong American, I didn't feel I could own the lines I was uttering. Vang has stated that he was uncomfortable with the reaction of white audiences to the film, finding their laughter at the playing off of racial slurs as humor unnerving and one more excuse for ignoring white supremacy and racism. Philip W. Chung of Asian Week said that Eastwood, portraying a white man, was the main weapon of the film, even though screenwriter Nick Schenk does his best to portray Hmong culture and the main Hmong characters with both depth and cultural sensitivity. Chung argued that Gran Torino might have been another white man saves the day story, but that what Eastwood has really created is not a story about the white man saving the minority, though it can be read on that level and I'm sure some will, but a critical examination of an iconic brand of white macho maleness that he played a significant part in creating. Gran Torino was recognized by the American Film Institute as one of the 10 best films of 2008. Clint Eastwood's performance has also garnered recognition. He won an award for Best Actor from the National Board of Review, he was nominated for the Broadcast Film Critics Association, Critics' Choice Awards, and by the Chicago Film Critics Association Awards for Best Actor. An original song from the film, Gran Torino, performed by Jamie Cullum, was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Song. The Art Directors Guild nominated Gran Torino in the Contemporary Film category. The film, however, was ignored by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences at the 81st Academy Awards when it was not nominated for a single Oscar, which led to heated criticism from many who felt that the Academy had also deliberately snubbed Revolutionary Road and Changeling, which Eastwood also directed, from the 5 major categories. In 2010, the film was named Best Foreign Film at the César Awards in France. Mark D. Lee and Cedric N. Lee, 2 Hmong filmmakers from Detroit, directed a documentary called Gran Torino, Next Door, about how Vang and Annie Her were chosen for their roles in the film and the Hmong actors' offset activities. It was released on Blu-ray. Vang acted in a YouTube parody of one scene in Gran Torino, titled Thou Does Walt, Lost Scenes from Gran Torino. The YouTube parody addresses a scene involving a barber shop, and the views of masculinity in the original scene. Clint Eastwood, regarded as something of a master of cinema by many, not all, traditional media film critics, is generally disdained, even hated, by the great majority of bloggers and other internet-based movie people. This is indeed one of the few issues on which there's a clear distinction between print and internet critics. As a longtime fan of the director, I was on board the best living American filmmaker bandwagon before there even was a blogosphere. I've always felt a bit disappointed by that distinction, which I think traces back to the notorious 2004 Oscars, when Eastwood beat the perpetual bridesmaid Martin Scorsese to a Best Director award, having unforgivably done better work directing a superior film. Maybe that's being bigoted against my fellow internet film buffs, who might very well have an actual legitimate reason to dislike the man that isn't based in his admittedly very obvious Oscar-baiting tendencies. At any rate, the Scorsese connection ought to have been wiped clear in 2006, when Marty's tired work on a bland crime drama beat one of Eastwood's best films ever to the top 2 awards. But I haven't come here to go on and on about how Scorsese needed to retire in 1990, while Clint has spent the last decade making the most interesting films of his career. I have come here instead to praise Gran Torino, not perhaps the best of Eastwood's recent films, but a fairly perfect example of all the things that make people like me break out phrases like the best living American filmmaker when his name comes up. That is, it's the most typical film he's made during his renaissance that started up in 2003, and therefore an ideal place to mount all sorts of overly enthusiastic arguments about the director's aesthetic. This isn't something I've ever seen in print before, but I don't imagine that anybody would violently disagree. Eastwood has spent his entire 37-year career as a director emulating Don Siegel, with whom he made 5 movies between 1968 and 1979, and to whom he co-dedicated his 1992 masterpiece Unforgiven. Siegel, for the uninitiated, was one of a generation of filmmakers during the 1940s, 50s and 60s who made extremely pulpy films with a brutally simple, direct aesthetic, a group of men who essentially and probably unconsciously applied the literary techniques of Ernest Hemingway to cinema. Such directors are all but extinct in the modern world, with Eastwood the single working representative, to the best of my knowledge, of a tradition that has included the likes of Sam Fuller, Nicholas Ray, Anthony Mann, and Bud Boetticher. Right from the start, Eastwood subscribed to these men's stripped-down style, though not always with great success. For every early outlaw Josie Wales there's a Firefox. Like many great pulp directors, Eastwood hasn't always selected or been given the best screenplays, and his ability to overcome a weak script is historically uneven. Still, for those whose formal tastes run towards the lean and masculine, nearly all of his films have had some small compensation, no matter how poor the writing. Of late, Eastwood's aesthetic has reached a harsh perfection, in his pair of neo-noirs Mystic River and $1 Million Baby, neither of which has been fully appreciated in terms of its position relative to the great 1950s films noirs, and in his nihilistically dispassionate World War II dyad Flags of Our Fathers and Letters of Iwo Jima, he has reached a conservative formalist utopia in which theme, narrative, and character are all functions of lighting and camera angle. He hit a snag with Changeling, an overwritten, visually stuffy period piece cum cop thriller, but in Gran Torino the Clint that I grew up with has come roaring back. He's finally married his newly perfected skills as a visual storyteller to the kind of stories that he's been part of throughout his career as actor and director. Dirty Harry Callahan as a hateful retiree, filtered through Tom Stern's unforgiving, monochromatic camera lens. Gran Torino is the story of a Korean war vet and retired Detroit auto worker named Walt Kowalski, whom we meet at his wife's funeral. Walt is a dick. There's no other way to put. Sure, Eastwood and screenwriter Nick Schenk disguise that fact a bit by contrasting Walt against his even worse family, and by presenting Walt as a comic figure in the early going. All those silly moments in the trailer, which seemed so serious, but everybody laughed at them. Turns out we were supposed to laugh. But it's not possible to see Walt's casual racism against pretty much every ethnic group that can be found in Detroit, and his delight in making fun of a young priest, Christopher Carley, just because he can get away with it, and assume that we're meant to find him at all respectable. Without getting into the details, Walt is forced into a modern multicultural world that he's not really anxious to face when the Hmong family next door is threatened by a local gang, and without meaning to, the old crank takes the teenaged Thao, Vang, under his wing, with the boy and man bonding over icons of masculine identity, like tools, yard work, and Walt's pristine 1972 Ford Gran Torino. The film's programmatic depiction of Walt's transition from xenophobe to grudging member of a changing America is hardly subtle, and at times the film lurches into well-intentioned racism itself, particularly in the form of Thao's sister Sue, Annie her. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out if Sue's didactic, on-the-nose dialogue is the result of poor acting, poor writing, or very canny acting and writing meant to suggest that the young woman is pretending to have a better grasp of her adopted language than is the case, but the fact that I can question this at all doesn't augur in the film's favor. Yet I simply can't get myself very worked up over the gaping flaws in the screenplay, simply because in every other way, Gran Torino feels like a proud throwback to the pulp message pictures of the 1950s, and none of those films were particularly subtle or sensitive. Honestly, Gran Torino feels like Eastwood's most Sam Fuller-y film ever, chiefly in its fetishistic treatment of the Korean War and its ethnographic obsession with an obscure ethnic group. Sure, it's watered down Fuller, but that's a lot better than no Fuller at all, which is what we get in essentially every other movie that exists these days. Besides, Eastwood has the directorial chops to justify the comparison, almost. Gran Torino isn't the formal masterpiece that $1 Million Baby was, but it's impeccably shot, and except for a handful of shots that clearly go on for a few frames too long, every single cut seems to serve a purpose. There's an urgency born from necessity when a film is produced quickly, without time to waste on set. Every shot has to mean something, else it doesn't justify the setup time. This is the secret behind some of Fuller's best work of the 1950s, and the fact that Gran Torino had the fastest turnaround time of any Eastwood film this decade shows. It's incredibly lean, the first of the director's films under 2 hours since 2002's Blood Work. Before I say goodbye to the film, I would be a fool to ignore the elephant in the room. Eastwood himself plays Walt, and he claims that with this film, he retires from acting. It's not hard to believe him. The film is plainly a goodbye to the Dirty Harry persona that, along with the man with no name, who was disposed of in Unforgiven, underlies every other Eastwood character. The performance itself doesn't necessarily rate among the actor's best. $1 Million Baby had a much better portrait of the artist as an old man, and several of his 90s films showcased a more interesting idea of a man tormented by the violence he has done and must continue to do. But it's a fine farewell, much better than e.g. Woody Allen in Scoop. That Eastwood is a great performer I'm taking as written. Of course, like his fellow Western icon John Wayne, there continue to be an ever-dwindling number of people who mistake his limited range for a lack of talent, but I'll just let those people find enlightenment themselves. Look, not everyone is going to like Gran Torino. It's undeniably hokey. But all pulp fiction is ultimately a little hokey, and that's usually why the makers of such movies compensate by bringing their A-game behind the camera. I can't make anybody love Eastwood's aesthetic, but for those who do, this is a giant step up from Changeling, and different enough from his great films in the middle of the decade to demonstrate conclusively that old age hasn't led the director into a comfort zone. He continues to find new and sometimes weird ways to challenge himself creatively. Gran Torino may be lopsided, hammy, and overdetermined, but those are exactly the reasons I'm compelled to call it a great movie. I would like to grow up to be like Clint Eastwood. Eastwood the director, Eastwood the actor, Eastwood the invincible, Eastwood the old man. What other figure in the history of the cinema has been an actor for 53 years, a director for 37, won 2 Oscars for direction, 2 more for Best Picture, plus the Threlberg Award, and at 78 can direct himself in his own film and look meaner than hell? None, that's how many. Gran Torino stars Eastwood as an American icon once again, this time as a cantankerous, racist, beer-chugging retired Detroit auto worker who keeps his shotgun ready to lock and load. Dirty Harry on a pension, we're thinking, until we realize that only the auto worker retired. Dirty Harry is still on the job. Eastwood plays the character as a man bursting with energy, most of which he uses to hold himself in. Each word, each scowl, seems to have broken loose from a deep place. Walt Kowalski calls the Asian family next door gooks and chinks and so many other names. He must have made it a study. How does he think this sounds? When he gets to know Thao, the teenage Hmong who lives next door, he takes him down to his barber for a lesson in how Americans talk. He and the barber call each other a Polak and a Dago and so on, and Thao is supposed to get the spirit. I found this scene far from realistic and wondered what Walt was trying to teach Thao. Then it occurred to me Walt didn't know it wasn't realistic. Walt is not so much a racist as a security guard, protecting his own security. He sits on his porch defending the theory that your right to walk through this world ends when your toe touches his lawn. Walt's wife has just died. I would have loved to meet her, and his sons have learned once again that the old bastard wants them to stay the hell out of his business. In his eyes, they're overweight meddlers working at meaningless jobs, and his granddaughter is a self-centered greed machine. Walt sits on his porch all day long, when he's not doing house repairs or working on his prized 1972 Gran Torino, a car he helped assemble on the Ford assembly line. He sees a lot. He sees a carload of Hmong gangstas trying to enlist the quiet, studious Thao into their thuggery. When they threaten Thao to make him try to steal the Gran Torino, Walt catches him red-handed and would just as soon shoot him as not. Then Thao's sister Sue, Annie her, likable and sensible, comes over to apologize for her family and offer Thao's services for odd jobs. Walt accepts only reluctantly. When Sue is threatened by some black bullies, Walt's eyes narrow and he growls and gets involved because it is his nature. What with one thing and another, his life becomes strangely linked with these people, although Sue has to explain that the Hmong are mountain people from Laos who were US allies and found it advisable to leave their homeland. When she drags him over to join a family gathering, Walt casually calls them all gooks and Sue a dragon lady. They seem like awfully good sports about it, although a lot of them may not speak English. Walt seems unaware that his role is to embrace their common humanity, although he likes it when they stuff him with great-tasting Hmong food and flatter him. Among actors of Eastwood's generation, James Garner might have been able to play this role, but my guess is, he'd be too nice in it. Eastwood doesn't play nice. Walt makes no apologies for who he is, and that's why, when he begins to decide he likes his neighbors better than his own family, it means something. Gran Torino isn't a liberal parable. It's more like, out of the frying pan and into the melting pot. Along the way, he fends off the sincere but very young parish priest, a persuasive Christopher Carley, who is only carrying out the deathbed wishes of the late Mrs. Kowalski. Walt is a nominal Catholic. Hardly even nominal. Gran Torino is about two things, I believe. It's about the belated flowering of a man's better nature. And it's about Americans of different races growing more open to one another in the new century. This doesn't involve some kind of grand transformation. It involves starting to see the gooks next door as people you love. And it helps if you live in the kind of neighborhood where they are next door. If the climax seems too generic and pre-programmed, with too much happening fairly quickly, I like that better than if it just dribbled off into sweetness. So would Walt. Gran Torino is a drama directed by Clint Eastwood that portrays a white American veteran's adjustment to his new Hmong neighbors. The film distinguishes itself through its compelling fusion of Hmong and Midwestern American culture. Its story of a grumpy old man finding purpose through a new young figure may feel played out today. This was really the film that popularized that trope on a grander scale than before, even though it didn't invent it. Like I said, the fusion of Hmong culture is what gives it a unique flavor that makes the film feel new and even educational about a culture that isn't widely known. Eastwood's direction feels faithful and respectful to that culture, and he even uses their clothing and music to give the film an intriguing atmosphere. The script keeps a smooth flow and a youthful atmosphere that shows Eastwood's ability to stay in touch with younger audiences. The character dynamics feel real and engaging, and also respectful to the subject matter. You believe in the relationships because the script just feels authentic and has enough vibrancy to make its maybe overtold story stand out. And that's probably the main issue. The script is good scene by scene, but it doesn't really swing for the fences. The film feels like it's playing it safe by sticking to that formula, never truly challenging the audience's expectations of where the story is headed. So, even though it stands out stylistically and culturally, it still very much sticks to a narrative formula and doesn't try to subvert it in a meaningful or surprising way. The cast does a great job of keeping the film engaging and feeling lively. Eastwood delivers his classic tough guy role, yet still manages to keep it fresh and distinct from his other performances. Annie Her is genuinely charming and shares great chemistry with Eastwood. She grounds the film and brings a youthful exuberance. Vang brings a convincing meekness to his role that contrasts sharply with Eastwood's character. Among the supporting cast, Christopher Carley, John Carroll Lynch, Sonny Vu, Dreama, and Chi Thao also stood out. Overall, this is an enjoyable, engaging, and even educational film that delivers all the emotional beats you'd expect from its premise. But that is also where it suffers for me. It never really breaks free from its formula, which unfortunately makes the entire experience feel overly familiar. If you don't mind that sense of predictability and are fond of this type of story, then this film is definitely for you. If that bothers you, then this film isn't for you. Clint Eastwood's place in cinema history has been well and truly established by both his iconic presence on screen and his talented work behind the camera. Eastwood really doesn't need to prove himself any further, but that hasn't stopped him from continuing to create entertaining and well-crafted pieces of cinema. While Gran Torino is one of two films that he directed in 2008, The Magnificent Changeling being the other, it is the first film that he has acted in since his Academy Award-winning 2004 film $1 Million Baby. It becomes clear very early on in Gran Torino that Eastwood is having a lot of fun. He plays Walt Kowalski, a Korean War veteran and recent widower who loves beer, guns, and American-made cars. He has no patience for his family, religion, or the Hmong family who have moved in next door. Walt is super conservative man and is all growls and snarls. Nevertheless, while Walt is clearly a grumpy old bastard, he does have a sense of righteousness and the capacity to evolve beyond his prejudices. After stopping his young Hmong neighbor Thao, newcomer Beer Vang, from stealing his beloved 1972 Ford Gran Torino, Walt learns about the gang problem in the neighborhood. Thao had been instructed to steal the car by the local gang as a form of initiation, and the same gang are also harassing Thao's sister Sue, Annie Her, another newcomer. After befriending Sue and taking Thao under his wing, Walt becomes aware of the necessity to act against the gang. As a director, Eastwood has an extremely economical and fast filming style where he only allows 1 or 2 takes before moving on to the next scene. This certainly gives a very fresh and immediate feel to films with more professional actors, but unfortunately the largely inexperienced Hmong cast in Gran Torino could have benefited from a few more retakes. The script could have also benefited from a bit more development, as there are several clunky cases of over-explanatory dialogue. Nevertheless, Gran Torino is a terrific film and surprisingly funny. Nobody can snarl out insults like Eastwood does, and his frequent tirades are often highly entertaining. Walt's attempts to help Thao learn to act like a man are hilarious in their ridiculousness but also oddly sweet. Walt evokes many of Eastwood's legendary cop and cowboy tough guy characters, who considered themselves old-school defenders of justice and the American way. It is initially difficult not to imagine Walt as an aged version of Inspector Dirty Harry Callahan, who tortures suspects, Dirty Harry, and make comments such as, "Nothing wrong with shooting as long as the right people get shot, magnum force." But Gran Torino also evokes the more sophisticated values and ideas that Eastwood has embedded in the films that he directs, in particular the theme of violence and revenge as soul-destroying acts. See The Outlaw Josie Wales, Unforgiven, Mystic River. Gran Torino is not Eastwood's best film as director or actor, but it perfectly encapsulates his on-screen persona and his brilliant directorial career. Gran Torino is a 2008 film, directed by and starring Clint Eastwood, in what was once rumored to be his final on-screen performance. Note: Eastwood plays Walt Kowalski, an elderly retired veteran of the Korean War living in Highland Park, Michigan, a rundown suburb of Detroit, shortly after the death of his wife. He has difficulty relating to his two grown-up sons, who are caught up in their own lives, and generally disapproves of the way the world is changing, such as the influx of the Hmong people, immigrants who fled Laos after the Vietnam War. Next door is Thao Vang Lor, a quiet boy who is pressured into joining his cousin Spider's gang. As part of his initiation, Thao is pressured to steal Walt's prized possession, a 1972 Ford Gran Torino, but fails, and is caught. For dishonoring his family, Thao's mother asks Walt to accept Thao's help in doing chores around his house, which leads to an odd friendship. Spider, upset at Thao's rejection of his gang, begins to retaliate against the family, forcing Walt to intervene. In Gran Torino, Clint Eastwood's character, Walt Kowalski, goes from being an unashamed racist to, still racist but, perhaps, a little more likable. Over the course of the film, he slowly bonds with a Hmong family that moves in next door to him, feuds with a local priest, contracts lung cancer and stands up to a local gang. You can't deny that Clint gets a lot of action out of a small cast and a location that is, essentially, two neighboring houses. And the film, like the Walt himself, is good, great, even, despite all of its faults. And they are some faults. It's badly written, especially some screamingly bad pieces of plot exposition in the opening quarter. It needs drastic re-editing, a certain priest character could be left out entirely, and several cuts simply don't make chronological sense, and it stands almost constantly at the edge of comedy. Yet, somehow, it stands up against, perhaps, even, bests, Eastwood's other film from 2008, Changeling, which was a powerfully made and woefully underappreciated work. Gran Torino is set in a nowhere place, a nondescript American suburbia, populated by, as Paul Simon might put it, the dead and dying, be they the aged or the gang members who roam the streets, looking for a stray bullet. Walt is, from the beginning, an outsider, and it doesn't help that his family are comprised of some of the most incredibly banal and selfish people ever to grace the screen. Eastwood's performance is contrived out of snarled epithets and guttural exhalations. It's a knowing throwback to his days as Dirty Harry Callahan and the Man with No Name, and it is when this connection becomes clear, quick draw gun battles and all, that Gran Torino blossoms. A lesser filmmaker than Eastwood could not get away with it, but the cliched training montages and clunking dialogue are, arguably, one of the film's strengths. Eastwood has dispensed of his typical economy and adopted a style more suited to Coogan's Bluff, or one of the later Dirty Harry sequels. Yet where, in those films, the fabric of the movie itself is essentially racist, rewatching Dirty Harry, it becomes painfully clear that almost all of the minor criminal characters, dispatched with abandon by Clint and his massive revolver, are black. In Gran Torino the shockingly, almost farcically, racist attitudes of Eastwood's character stand in stark contrast to the world around him. Gran Torino is, essentially, a beautifully crafted exercise in audience baiting. It knowingly uses the same tricks as Dirty Harry, demonizing the antagonists to the extent that the viewer demands their blood, before pulling back at the last moment. The film's climactic sequence is an elegantly staged double bluff, replete with dodgy coincidences and last-minute changes of character to round it all off. It is, in places, hard to distinguish genuine faults from intended ones. The Father Janovich character, a young Catholic priest whose goal is to convert Walt, is poorly cast, and his omission would result in a more focused film. Neither is Gran Torino a brilliant answer to Eastwood's political critics, Spike Lee, in particular, as, I suspect, Eastwood may have wanted it to be. It may be a perfect elegy to the character that he crafted with Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, but its dramatization of racial conflict, on a purely cinematic level, cannot compare to Lee's intoxicatingly bombastic style that he perfected with Do the Right Thing. As the end credits begin to play, after a ridiculously kitsch image of a cute dog in the eponymous car, Eastwood begins to sing on the soundtrack. Like Gran Torino, it's grating and out of tune, but, also, haunting and beautifully sad. Gran Torino is old-fashioned filmmaking, a masterpiece of craft, finely tuned and polished. While its innovations are slight, the effort and judgment displayed are enough to make it one of Eastwood's better works. It is a fitting end to his acting career, testament to his skill as director, and an excellent display of a variety of talents. They do, it seems, still sometimes make them like they used to. Eastwood is Walt Kowalski, a Korean War veteran, a former Ford employee, an isolated father and widower, alienated from the world around him. He's a racist old man, certainly, but the film doesn't seek to excuse him. This may be a film about redemption, but it isn't necessarily one that forgives. Walt's family are a disappointment to him. The amazingly similar-looking Brian Haley and Brian Howe are his sons, themselves fathers to grandchildren that are alien to Walt, disrespectful at their grandmother's funeral, even less willing to treat him as a person rather than an obligation. It's easy to see how the Kowalskis grew apart, even to see the why of it, but that makes it no less tragic. It is at the funeral that Walt is challenged by Father Janovich, the parish's new priest, who provided comfort to Mrs. Kowalski before she passed. Christopher Carley manages to convince as a new model Catholic priest, naive and inexperienced, but well-meaning. Walt's wife extracted a promise from the young Father Janovich that he would take his confession. Kowalski's irascible nature and Janovich's youthful persistence force the two into conflict. When they discuss Walt's time in Korea, it becomes clear that they don't understand each other. One is trying to avoid the subject, the other to empathize. Without common ground, they are talking past each other. After the funeral, there is a confrontation involving Kowalski's neighbors, and it's here that he, and the audience, meet Thao and Sue Lor, members of the area's Hmong community. The Kowalskis were the last Americans in the neighborhood, replaced by wave after wave of immigrants. After Walt runs off a gang threatening Thao, he becomes a hero to the community. As Sue reaches out to Walt in friendship, we start to learn why. Annie Her is excellent as Sue, straddling her parent cultures, the Hmong tribes of the Vietnamese highlands and the America her parents moved to after the war. As she explains, her people are traditional, as set in their ways as Kowalski is. Over a series of initially uncomfortable meetings, he discovers how much he has in common with the Hmong, how much he has missed because of his retreat. When he takes on the task of manning up her brother Thao, it's hard to read his motivations, all the more because they change. Eastwood is actor enough to show us Kowalski starting to engage with the world, to grow if not to change himself. Walt's interactions have the air of ritual. His racism is real, uncomfortably so, but it's born of his discomfort, his need for order, his experiences, and his inexperience. His refusal to engage, perhaps a product of his fear of empathizing with those he fought and killed in Korea, left him isolated. It's unpleasant, even when it is part of male bonding, understandable, though only in that Walt's reasons speak to his weaknesses. When he is challenged, by Janovich and Sue, he reacts, responds. His attitudes are a product of ignorance, and as he learns, his attitudes change. Not completely, but enough to give him something approaching peace. Walt's two confessions are powerful, honest, affecting. The reactions of those who hear them similarly telling. The twin elements of routine and ritual are vital to the film. It seems in part a film trapped in the 50s because that is the world Walt has made for himself. There are tropes at work here, even things that are near stereotypes, but the reason these features have become standards is because when they are well done they work well. Here they are executed perfectly. This is a simple story, at first apparently broadly brushed, but behind those seemingly clumsy strokes are fine details. Craftsmanship is an important concept, pride in a job well done. Every moment works towards the whole. While there is humor, sadness, drama, it all serves to illuminate Walt's situation, his journey, his adoption of the Lors as a surrogate family, or indeed theirs of him. Nick Schenk and Dave Johansson's script is a robust blueprint, the performances are uniformly excellent, but Eastwood's execution is what completes the film. Clint Eastwood directed, produced, and starred in the 2008 film, Gran Torino. There's much to say about this oxymoron of a character, scarred and sweet, rude and noble, cantankerous and romantic, all wrapped up into a celluloid package and delivered by the scruffy, inaudible Clint Eastwood. It's ranked high at number 95 on the IMDb 250 film countdown. Should it be, this was a film that had my heart and my head fighting each other. Any plot with a dynamic character is preferable than a static one. Clint acted as an old dirty Harry with too many snarls and one-liners. I thought the script by Nick Schenk was a choppy mix of horrible, mediocre, and small beams of brilliant. Walt Kowalski I could relate to. I grew up listening to veterans of the Korean War talking like Walt Kowalski. Men back then were supposed to be hard, unsympathetic. You better know how to chase a skirt, drink beer, swing a hammer, and shed no tear. That generation kept their yards immaculate, took care of everything they owned and threw nothing away. They would die for their family and country. Racial tags and slurs were common growing up as a kid. Political correctness hadn't been suggested yet. Another way to put it, Walt Kowalski was Archie Bunker, and Archie was as common as apple pie, lemonade, and the American flag. Experiencing this, I didn't have a problem with Walt Kowalski in the film. Clint Eastwood has played the same character for 50 years, so I wasn't surprised he was, again, the hard shell with the soft middle. Walt reluctantly mentors Thao, who he nicknames Toad. Thao is played by actor Vang. It was his first acting job, and you could tell. Unfortunately, Vang was one of the worst actors in the cast along with the neophyte priest, Father Janovich. Anytime they conversed with Clint Eastwood, it was painful to watch. The script was terrible and their acting wooden and unbelievable. There was very little chemistry between Eastwood and the actors in the film except the bright spot, Sue, played by Annie Her. Annie Her had a great role in Sue. Her lame boyfriend, appearing briefly as Pretty Boy Trey, was played by Clint's son, Scott Eastwood. Another family member contributed to Eastwood's film, Kyle Eastwood, who wrote the score. But back to Annie. She delivered her lines with grace and energy which was sorely lacking in the other performances. Sue was the interpreter, the feminist, the smart Asian female who intercedes and befriends Walt Kowalski. It is only after she is attacked that the film becomes interesting. While Walt hacks up blood, the ending is clear, but the climax is nicely done. While it sounds like I disliked the film, I cried at the end, and still love the film despite its flaws. Perhaps because I understood what Clint Eastwood was trying to do. Here was a film about the effect of the horrors of war. Walt Kowalski lived with the guilt of killing Korean soldiers. It haunted and jaded his entire life. Here, now, was Thao, who was Walt's redemption. By sacrificing his life for Thao, he was able to come to peace with his past and give a life to Thao who would be free of the gang predators. By vindicating Sue's attack, Walt in one move saves the neighborhood, the family, and Thao and Sue. The irony in the film is wonderful. Walt Kowalski becomes more comfortable with the customs and food of the Hmong than his own family. Walt had failed as a father to his two sons, unable to have a positive relationship with them or affirming their manhood. With Thao, Walt is able to teach him how to be a man, albeit in an old school way, by teaching him how to repair, garden, build, and care for possessions. That's what real men do. They care for their families and protect them. For those reasons, the audience discovers they look beyond the gruff exterior of Walt and see the loyal, loving man. At the same time, Walt Kowalski looks beyond the Asian stereotype and sees his Hmong neighbors as people with similar values as his own. While the traditions and customs displayed in the film might be inaccurate at times, the purpose behind the film is why Gran Torino is ranked pretty high. Clint Eastwood attempts to reveal universal truths in his films, and I appreciate that. I can remember vividly a time as a young kid when I was riding to lunch with my grandfather in the small town of Camden, South Carolina, and getting pulled over by the police. As the police started coming to the car, I was scared to death. But as I looked over at my grandfather, he just smiled as he spit his chewing tobacco out the window. It turned out that we weren't in trouble, but the police officer wanted to purchase my grandfather's 1974 Ford Ranchero Squire. Not only was the car my grandfather's prized possession, but it was also a good portrayal of him, tough as nails, strong as an ox, and one of a kind. Similar to my grandfather is Walt Kowalski, Clint Eastwood, the main character in Gran Torino. Walt's a tobacco-chewing, chain-smoking Korean war vet and a no-nonsense kind of guy. His pride and joy is a 1972 Ford Gran Torino. He doesn't do well with change, including the changes his neighborhood is going through. What used to be a white suburban Michigan neighborhood is now one filled with multiracial gang wars and a predominantly Asian community. Walt is too stubborn to move, and now that his wife is gone, it's just him and his dog Daisy, left to sit on the porch, drink beer, and grumble under his breath about his neighbors. Things change, however, when Walt catches someone trying to steal his Gran Torino. That someone is next-door neighbor Theo, a teenage boy who's being initiated into a gang. It's through this incident that Walt finally connects with those in his neighborhood. Walt takes it upon himself to keep Theo out of the gang and out of trouble. An unlikely friendship begins to develop between Theo and Walt. From that friendship comes an inspiring, redemptive, sometimes funny, and heartfelt film by Clint Eastwood. The film chronicles a man realizing the mistakes he's made in his life and finding his way to come to terms with them and accept forgiveness. It also does a great job of showing to viewers who didn't grow up with a grandfather, like mine, a realistic portrayal of the generation of Walt Kowalski, hard-working, good-hearted, but rough around the edges. There are many great qualities and teachable moments in Gran Torino, but it does come with a price. The film is rated R, mainly for its very strong language, as well as some violence. There are over 100 profanities in the film, and while that is clearly a lot, it's founded in realism. The majority of the language comes from the various gangs in the neighborhood, as well as Walt himself. Along with the profanities, one of the central themes of the film is racism. Racial slurs come flying out of Walt's mouth all movie long, and while this isn't appropriate, the film does put into context that Walt uses these slurs just as much with his friends, his barber, as he does with people he doesn't like. It's seen more of as a generational gap than anything overly mean-spirited. It's also the way that Walt keeps others at arm's distance, and once the neighborhood realizes this, they ignore the comments and befriend him anyway. Because of my relationship with my grandfather, this movie really hit home for me, and it will definitely do the same for those with similar experiences growing up. Clint Eastwood has made a film that is sometimes hard to watch. It's rough, realistic, but ultimately redemptive. Just like my grandfather, the lead character, and the car itself, Gran Torino is tough as nails, strong as an ox, and one of a kind. Still planning for this Valentine's weekend? How about a date movie? Wait, guys, don't run away. This one's for you. I hate to read movie reviews with the tagline "Bring tissues." Half of our demographics would clearly stay away. But what with a movie entitled Gran Torino starring Clint Eastwood? Will it scare away the other half? I'm here to ensure you all girlfriends, wives, and future wives, it's safe. You won't be bombarded with ear-piercing explosions and car crashes, or gratuitous adrenaline-pumping violence, but there are engrossing moments that both of you will find meaningful. Clint Eastwood is Walt Kowalski, a hardened and critical old man who has just lost his wife. Walt Kowalski is Dirty Harry in his 70s. He hasn't lost any of his macho madness. Adding oil to the fire, he is one growling racist, and he makes his feelings known to all who cross his path, specifically, his new neighbors, a Hmong family originally from Laos. The 1972 Gran Torino Walt owns and treats with great care is what the teenager next door has to steal under coercion as an act of gang initiation. That night begins the series of events that change the lives of these two households. What's interesting to watch is how Walt Kowalski's antagonistic fervor is diverted into a protective mode, when the teenagers next door are bullied by gangs. Here the spirit of Dirty Harry rises to the occasion. Taking the teenage boy Thao, Vang, under his wings, he begins to connect and even come to treasure a bond that he subtly strives to build up. Contributing to the otherwise simple storyline is the internal exploration of Walt's tormented inner world. He encounters his nemesis in the young Catholic priest Father Janovich, Christopher Carley, who has promised Walt's wife that he would come check on him after she's gone. The movie efficiently makes the best use of these two character foils. The innocent and naive versus the disgruntled skeptic. It's gratifying to see how both of them change over the course of events. And it's utterly moving to watch the slow process of one man's ultimate search for redemption in the context of a beleaguered society riddled with hatred and racism. Eastwood is by far the most experienced actor here. In contrast, the young ones pale in their performance. However, this is in a way realistic, for who wouldn't be intimidated by such a formidable neighbor? And yet, the movie excels in its delivery of a message, or two, so poignantly, it catches you off guard. The multi-talented Eastwood here directs, acts, and composes the music. He has crafted a powerful and moving piece of entertainment. If you're not too critical about the language, or a few simplistic stereotyping, this is one movie that can certainly make your day. Clint Eastwood is the rare actor who has had two final acts in his career. The first came in 1992, when the revisionist Western Unforgiven accidentally revitalized his career after a full decade of relative irrelevance. The only good films Eastwood made in the 1980s were Tightrope, Bird, and The Dead Pool, none of which were terribly successful. Unforgiven seemed to represent one final Western, a final action film that attempted to reinterpret or deconstruct the various mythical gunslingers of his heyday. But, of course, it received rapturous reviews, became Eastwood's first $100 million grossing picture and won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Mr. Eastwood himself. So this final curtain instead paved the way for Clint Eastwood, critically admired director, never mind that he had been directing solid films since Play Misty for Me in 1971. Unforgiven was followed by 15 years of critically acclaimed films, and another Best Picture/Best Director Oscar combo for $1 Million Baby in 2004. For this last leg of his career, Eastwood has been known as a director first, and an actor second. Since 1992, he acted in only one picture not of his making, Wolfgang Petersen's masterpiece 1993 thriller, In the Line of Fire. Gran Torino will allegedly be Clint Eastwood's final acting role. If this is the case, then the 78-year-old icon has chosen a perfectly pleasant offshoot as his acting swan song. That it is not a film worthy of multiple Oscars is not a slight against the picture. It is a fun, witty, and poignant last dance that ends up being a modern-day take on the classic Western archetype that Eastwood knows so well. Whether Eastwood deserves or receives an Oscar nomination for his lead performance is irrelevant. It is every bit as appropriate an acting finale as John Wayne's The Shouldest. A token amount of plot, Walt Kowalski is a Korean War veteran who has stayed in his old neighborhood as the economic conditions deteriorated and his neighbors began to less resemble himself and begin to resemble the very Koreans he went to war with in his youth. This unrepentant racist himself lost and without purpose following the death of his wife. However, circumstances change when a young Hmong neighbor attempts to steal Walt's prized automobile, his 1973 Gran Torino. After the youth's family forces him to work off his moral debt by helping Walt with various chores, the grumpy old man forms a surprising bond with his neighbors and with this young man. However, tensions from nearby gangs threaten to destroy Walt's newfound peace. The film is first and foremost a showcase for crusty old Clint. While the broadly comic performance skirts with camp from time to time, he actually says "Get off my lawn," in 2 separate scenes. The usual Eastwood subtlety and low-key filmmaking keeps the drama rooted in plausibility. And while the bond between Frank and Thao isn't terribly deep, arguably less so than, for example, the friendship between Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi in the first Karate Kid. It is entertaining, and their interactions with Walt's few friends provide solid laughs. The always welcome John Carroll Lynch cameos as a barber shop owner. And Clint Eastwood once again presents one of the most realistic, three-dimensional priests seen in film today. Christopher Carley is terrific here, as was Brian F. O'Byrne in $1 Million Baby. The film does have some worthwhile commentary on ethnicity. Walt's Hmong neighbors are generally hard-working, never expect a handout folks, the same kind of people whose values are supposed to embody real Americans in the eyes of so many who oppose immigration and decry the melting pot of America. The film also dances with the idea that the very people who most strongly oppose ethnic integration, conservative, lower-income suburbanites, are the ones who often live in a multicultural petri dish. And, despite being stand-ins for friendly minorities who mend Walt's racist heart, Thao and his sister Sue are intelligent, funny, and relatively three-dimensional characters in their own right. Something that the film gets just right is the idea that friendships between different races actually allow for more overtly humorous racism, since there is no longer any malicious intent. Sue laughs when Walt jokingly calls her a dragon lady, knowing that he's comfortable enough around her to be tossing out such ribald jabs. The last fourth of the film delves into Walt's struggle with the local gang element, and the film threatens to turn into grumpy old Dirty Harry. Without going into spoilers, I can say that it doesn't quite go to that extreme, and the finale has a surprising poignancy for those who know the classic Western myths. One could argue that it has similar ideas to No Country for Old Men, but I'll say no more than that. Gran Torino is not a masterpiece. It's a fun character drama that features a knowing but winning final performance by Clint Eastwood and just enough commentary to make it worth discussing. In this current deluge of pretentious, overly arty Oscar bait, Gran Torino is a solid, well-oiled machine. It's just an unpretentiously good yarn. There are a number of movies that I acknowledge as very good films, but I don't think I'll be able to watch them again. Often this is because they're too emotionally upsetting and intense for me. Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino, 2008, falls into this category. I watched the movie once. I cried a lot, and I still remember almost every scene. Basically, it's about an old Korean War veteran, Walt, who's stuck in his ways and is at odds with the way life has changed in the world, particularly in his inner city neighborhood. He's a widower, and his only companion is a faithful dog. Walt is not very sociable, and pretty much his only hobby is keeping his classic car, a 1972 Gran Torino, in excellent condition. After his next-door neighbor tries to steal it as part of a gang initiation, Walt decides to form a relationship with the teen and give him some guidance and protection. Walt finds himself heavily involved in a fight against this neighborhood gang. The movie is about human values, courage under pressure, racial dynamics, and forgiveness. There's a lot for the viewer to deal with. The movie wouldn't be able to tell the story genuinely without all the violence and strong language, so brace yourself for a strong impact. I love Clint Eastwood. He is a great actor, great director, and probably the biggest badass that ever lived. He has made good movies, he has made bad movies, and he has made meh movies, but one thing is always consistent with him: he is Clint fucking Eastwood. So now, let's review one of his more modern movies. Walt Kowalski, Clint Eastwood, is an old and grumpy war veteran who doesn't want anything to do with anyone. But after a young Hmong guy named Thao, Vang, tries to steal Walt's 1972 Gran Torino, roll credits, he is taken in by Walt, reluctantly by both of them, to try to redeem himself. And so begins a story of bonding and friendship and a grumpy/racist old man. And I am surprised how well the story was handled. The setup is somewhat familiar: old man reluctantly takes in young man but grows to like him. But it was handled in an interesting way that I liked. I was also surprised how touching the plot actually was. It really did get to me. Not only was the plot entertaining as all hell, but it was also really well told and, like I said, touching. You could say Walt is a terrible person, I won't blame Yat. But he was still an interesting character to follow since he isn't your typical old man protagonist. He was also really entertaining and had a lot of great lines to give. Clint Eastwood gave a great performance as him. Vang, who I've never heard of before, was also really good in this movie as this young man. Every actor was in fact great. Also, I did some research and it turns out one of the minor characters in this movie, name of the character is Trey, was played by Clint's son, Scott. That's kind of fun. The soundtrack for this movie has no real original score. The only hint of it is an original song that Clint Eastwood co-wrote. That's it for original musical material. Most songs were licensed tracks used throughout the movie, but that didn't ruin it at all. Au contraire, they worked very well like that. All music worked where it was used. Seeing as this movie was directed by Eastwood himself, it is of course very well directed. I don't think that comes as a surprise though, as Eastwood has shown for the past 40-ish years that he is a great director. This movie is very well shot and it never looked bad at all. What I was surprised at, however, was how legitimately funny it was. And by legitimately I mean that it never felt unintentional in any way, it was all intended and it was also very funny. I guess that is because of the overall great writing of this movie. This movie has been very well received. On Rotten Tomatoes it has a 79% positive rating with a fresh certification. On Metacritic it has a score of 72/100. Roger Ebert gave the movie 3,5/4 stars. And on IMDb.com it has an 8,2/10 and is ranked number 142 on the top 250 list. Gran Torino is a movie with a familiar yet well-told story, great performances, some good music, great direction, and some great writing. It was also surprisingly touching and funny. Time for my final score. Cough. My final score for Gran Torino is a when I think of a grumpy old man, I think of none other than Walter Matthau. But after watching Clint Eastwood's latest movie Gran Torino, I realize the scale that had Matthau on the top requires some adjustment. Eastwood takes the stodgy, miserable, old prick to new heights. At year 78, he's brought his dirty hairy persona to the old age home with the character of Walt Kowalski, a grizzled widower, a racist, and a veteran of the Korean War. He lives in a Detroit neighborhood that has seen better times. It is now run down and overrun with gangs and, in Walt's own words, gooks and slopes. But he soon finds himself involved with his yellow neighbors when he catches the boy Thao Lor, Vang, trying to steal his prized Gran Torino during a gang initiation, and when he saves the girl Sue Lor, Annie Her, from a possible rape by some idling black kids on a street corner. The Lors, as does the viewer as the movie progresses, see a redeeming quality in Walt, that his own children don't see, and continually attempt to get through to him as thanks for all he has inadvertently done for their family. He's not a bad man at heart, he's just perpetually stuck in the 1950s. This leads to some more than awkward, and unintentionally funny moments, including an extended family dinner at the Lors, at which Walt does and says everything insulting imaginable. The fascinating point to it all, is he thinks he is behaving quite normally and not for a second thinking that perhaps he is out of order. It's this melding of two vastly different cultures and mindsets that is at the crux of Gran Torino. Bit by bit Walt relearns what he's been missing from his own family life as he lets Thao and Sue in behind his tough, grim exterior. In return, he takes the bashful Thao under his wings in an effort to make a man out of him. It's a very enlightening tale, with some very bittersweet scenes shared between the three, all of which is held together by the strength of Eastwood's presence. But that doesn't mean the film is without flaws, some very serious flaws. One that I couldn't get over, as it pulled down the entire movie, was the weak performance by Vang in his first major film role, actually his first role ever. There are many moments where powerful emotions are brought up and it was clear he didn't have an inner well of inspiration to draw from. I imagine Eastwood, who also produced and directed, throwing his hands up in futility as he tried to get something out of B during one of the more pivotal climatic scenes, until finally just settling on the best of the worst takes. It's a shame too, because the character of Theo had a lot to offer. I also wasn't overly pleased with the ending. It was very cookie cutter and it did not belong tacked onto the ass end of this particular movie. It's been rumored that Gran Torino is going to be the last film Clint Eastwood will star in. For all of us, I hope that there isn't an ounce of truth to that. He's still got the chops to carry a film, as his performance here shows, and to not hear his ever gruffier voice would be a great loss. Plus, I'd love to see him go out on a much stronger note than this one with an ensemble cast worthy of being in the last film of a legend. I am a Clint Eastwood fan, both as an actor and a director. As a director he understands how to get the most out of very little, and he does this again in Gran Torino. The story of Gran Torino is very simple: old man changes kids and they in turn help to warm his heart. In the hands of a lesser director this film would have been so much formulaic pap. Luckily Mr. Eastwood is not a lesser director. He takes a simplistic and often done tale and infuses it with life, humor, charm, a bit of violence, and most of all lessons learned. The lesson in Gran Torino is one of simplicity in direction and humility in story. The direction is very simplistic, focusing on what needs focus to get the story across the easiest, and the story ends up being a very humble and almost small tale because of the direction. There's no need for complicated shots in a sparse setting such as the world of Walt Kowalski. His world is cut and dry, as is that of the Hmong, and a world that cut and dry needs direction that is cut and dry as well. Perhaps the simplest shot of the entire film and the one that expresses what Gran Torino is about in the simplest of ways is the shot of Daisy on the Lore's porch as Sue and Theo leave for Walt's funeral. That image of a dog that is now alone and expresses its sadness in its waiting like a dutiful friend for the return of his owner is the simplest shot possible. It expresses the devotion, caring and loss that is at the heart of Gran Torino, and it's all in the shot of a dog. Of course, others that are not dog lovers like I will probably not see the same thing in that particular shot. Clint Eastwood the actor gives one of his best performances. He is every bit the surly old neighbor of my grandpa's. He is the old war veteran that hasn't let go of his past and doesn't understand the world around him. He's also the old man that is just waiting for that one person that is willing to cut through his tough guy persona and enter his world. Sue and Theo manage to crack the shell of Walt, and in the process Mr. Eastwood shows off all his wares as an actor. He is equal parts badass, violent, humorous, distant and seeking. Finally in the end he comes to be at peace with himself and all those around him. It's not that he had to change, it's that he has finished his life and the world outside is no longer for him. That is why he takes the action he does at the end. The world is for Sue and Theo. It's their time to grow, and in the final message that there was always a gigantic heart underneath that rawhide skin of Walt makes sure that Theo and Sue can inherit their world. Gran Torino has its faults. There are moments where the dialogue is a bit too clunky, obvious, or cheesy. The tone also stretches towards melodrama at points, but not enough to seriously hurt the movie. Gran Torino isn't a movie that will change the world or a movie that will be remembered for all time, although the performance by Mr. Eastwood would be if I had my way. Gran Torino is a movie that takes on a classical subject and does it the right amount of justice. That plus Mr. Eastwood's performance made for a more than enjoyable movie-going experience. Gran Torino, directed by Clint Eastwood and released in 2008, introduces us to Mr. Kowalski, and I am calling him Mr. Kowalski because he absolutely hates being called Walt or Wally. He is a Korean War veteran whose wife recently passed away, leaving him a lonely man surrounded by a family he cannot really connect with or respect. He is one of the last old Americans left in his neighborhood, as most of his old neighbors have either passed away or moved away while Hmong families have moved in. One day, a teenage boy tries to steal his beloved Gran Torino but fails miserably. Afterward, the boy's family insists that he make up for his mistake by helping Mr. Kowalski. What starts as an awkward arrangement slowly turns into something genuine, as Mr. Kowalski begins to care for the boy and the people around him in ways he never expected. But this isn't just a heartwarming, old man story, because quickly things turn when the neighborhood gang starts to aim their sights on his neighbors and on him. With just below 2 hours, this is a great-paced crime/drama film with a little bit of lightheartedness. This movie never drags and is completely badass. Only Clint Eastwood can pull that off in his 70s. Every actor fits the film just right. Only Clint Eastwood as Walt Kowalski makes him feel like a lovable character, yes, not a perfect human being, but enough to make us root for him. Only Clint Eastwood can pull off the aura and badassery that makes you honestly think this guy is so tough, because he is. Christopher Carley as Father Janovich played his role greatly as a young father, or as Mr. Kowalski likes to say, Padre, or maybe just a cult leader. You take him very seriously as a father, and he never felt fake. The rest of the Hmong people, like Thao, are innocent and shy. At times it looked kind of bad acting, but I can't tell if that's on purpose, because when he's in this role, he's very shy and closed off. Even when he has to reach emotional levels, he never really gets there. I cannot tell if that's him as an actor or just the character being shy and closed off. Even when he's angry or at emotional highs, he doesn't go 100% vulnerable. If you check it out and have thoughts on his performance, I would love to hear them. Who really kills it is Sue. She just played brilliantly, and her performance felt authentic and like a real human being. When it comes to the whole vibe of the movie, I'll say mise en scene, but I'm really not trying to sound like a technical film person. It's just the best way I can talk about the overall vibe of the movie. Earlier I had a review about The Mule and I did not like how sharp and overpolished that movie looked. That was my only critique of it, but with this film, it was very gritty. I loved the coloring of this film. It felt very real. I saw some behind-the-scenes features about how they learned the culture of the Hmong people and how accurate they got their traditional outfits. They consulted heavily to stay true to the culture, which was great. I'm not an expert, but I saw some behind the scenes, and I had to give them proper credit for really trying and doing a good job with costume design and showing their culture on screen. This film was a blast to watch. I think I have seen this movie 3 or 4 times, but I didn't remember much from when I was young. I did remember loving it as a kid, but watching it now, Clint Eastwood was a total badass in every scene. When he helps Sue and she gets harassed in the corner of the street, he slowly reaches into his pocket and pretends to shoot each of them with a finger gun. That was so cool and still is so cool. I ended up rooting for him and loving that he finally became part of a family that he truly felt he could relate to. I just love the overall story of him getting along with people, enjoying their culture, and not being close-minded. It shows it's really not that hard to relate to others. Just because we come from opposite sides of the world doesn't mean we can't get along, doesn't mean we can't try each other's culture, and be civil with each other. I also love the mentor story of him teaching Thao how to fix things, how to earn his keep, and how to get out of his bubble and stop being shy, becoming a man. It's heartwarming seeing people from opposite sides of the world help each other, which was fantastic. Don't get me started on the gang. They 100% made me hate them because they're horrible human beings, and good job to Thao for not giving in. That shows a lot of pressure, and it still happens today with kids in neighborhoods. They don't give up until you end up doing things you didn't want to do. I also loved how Sue always stood up for Thao. It's so satisfying to see them finally find a sense of belonging with Mr. Kowalski, and for him to have someone to lean on as well. Without his wife, he didn't have anybody to relate to or lean on. I think this movie was a totally badass film that you absolutely need to watch. Only Clint Eastwood can pull this off in his 70s. I love the whole story of this old man who cannot relate to his family, is very isolated, very close-minded, but with just one little domino effect he starts relating to people from the opposite side of the world. They have nothing in common, yet they develop such a deep understanding of each other. The mentor-mentee story was fantastic. Don't get me started on the thriller and crime elements, there weren't many, but when they happened, they hit with 100% adrenaline. The ending was very thoughtful and smart. Watching it, I just loved it. It was nice to see, very heartwarming at times, yes, very badass, but mostly a heartwarming story of love and acceptance with a little bit of vengeance. Don't expect big action-packed thrills. This is mostly a heartwarming story with just a few badass moments. I give this a 5 out of 5. It's a fun time to watch. As a rule, I try to review all the films I see and books that I read. I really enjoy doing so. It's a hobby for me, and I see this blog as a kind of scrapbook where I can stick in all of my memories and look back over time at the brilliant stories I've encountered and the worlds I've visited. Sometimes though, I'll encounter a film or book that I just can't review immediately, and it is partially for the same reason that I review less of the television or music that I consume. It has to do with the greater depth at which I experience it and the impact that it has on me. Sometimes, words just won't do it justice. Detractors of television often seem to imply that it is a lesser art, but they've obviously not been exposed to some of the most powerful and moving moments in television history. Gran Torino was just such a film for me. It is a really fantastic film with a strong cast and well-written script. Clint Eastwood gives a powerful performance and greatly deserves the various award nominations that he received. I first watched Gran Torino back in April, and I let it brew in my mind for a couple of months until I watched it again on the plane on the way back from New York. Gran Torino deals with themes of racism, intercultural relations, and the scourge of gangs and its impact on youth culture. Eastwood plays Walt Kowalski, a Korean War veteran who finds that his neighborhood has become increasingly populated by Hmong people from Vietnam. In his first interactions with his neighbors, he stereotypes them and lumps them into the gook category, and he is hostile and antagonistic towards them. The on-screen relationship develops subtly and masterfully though, and at no stage does it feel forced or contrived. What emerges is an incredible relationship and a strong bond that changes all of the characters' lives forever. Gran Torino has been doing really well on the DVD charts lately and has topped the charts for several weeks. So this is supposed to be Clint Eastwood's final film in front of the camera. I really hope it is not, as he really is just a fantastic actor. He really has the on-screen presence which is so often lacked in younger actors. Clint Eastwood is an acting legend and should be watched by everyone. I am also very impressed with his directing skills as well. Gran Torino, Korean war vet Walt Kowalski, Clint Eastwood, sets out to reform his neighbor, a young Hmong teenager, who tried to steal Kowalski's prized possession, his 1972 Gran Torino. So Walt is not amused with the way his neighborhood has turned into over the years. With people from different countries now living there. Walt has a very turbulent relationship with his two sons, as he does not really know them. He therefore does not really know his grandchildren. I must say I was not impressed with the clothes they were wearing for their grandmother's funeral either. Very disrespectful, especially the granddaughter, who then proceeded to use her mobile phone during the service. Anyway, this is just one of the many issues that have made Walt into the bitter and twisted man he is, and some of the reasons for it too. Clint Eastwood really is fantastic at playing the guy who has a sordid past and needs to accept these different things, see Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. Being a massive fan of $1 Million Baby, I could not help draw a few comparisons from Gran Torino, probably both characters' involvement with priests and not being too nice to them at all. Because both characters have lost faith in religion for different events which occurred in their lives. Anyway, Gran Torino tackles the gang culture and how some people really do not seem to have a choice in the matter and are forced into a life of crime, when that is far from what they want. But they are too weak to be able to get themselves away from it. This is where Walt steps in when he befriends his neighbors Sue and Theo. While the subject matter of gangs and then different races in general may seem really heavy, this film really does have so extremely funny lines and dialogue. Every possible race is insulted or more made fun of in this film. Mainly by their own doing, which is amusing to watch. Possibly this could be the reason it was snubbed from an Oscar nominations. The ending is very powerful and just fantastic. I do not want to spoil it as I was not entirely sure myself what exactly was going to happen. While the support acting is not too good, I really would recommend this film just for Clint Eastwood's possible final performance on camera, as he really does show he is one of the greatest and best. Eastwood comes back to the big screen as the recently widowed and retired auto worker, Walt Kowalski. Kowalski is also a man who is deeply set in his own ways and coldly distant from his two sons and their families. The kind of man who keeps his M1 rifle cleaned and ready for action to defend what he clearly knows is his and unquestionably believes is right. From the opening scenes of Walt and his family at the funeral for Mrs. Kowalski to Walt's final and dramatic scenes on screen, Eastwood delivers a solid performance and brings a believability to the character that pulls the audience into the story with ease. Pretty much everyone knows a guy like Walt Kowalski, and that familiarity embodied in the equally familiar form of the laconic and soft-spoken Clint Eastwood makes it all fall into place. Kowalski, an embittered Korean War veteran with a deep distrust and dislike for Asian people, finds himself dealing with unwelcome changes in his neighborhood in the form of Vietnamese families moving into his once solidly Caucasian world. As Gran Torino unfolds, Walt Kowalski rescues his next-door neighbor, a young Hmong girl named Sue Lor, Annie Her, and as he finds himself becoming friends with the spunky, outspoken young girl, Walt also finds himself at first very begrudgingly taking on the task of reforming her teenaged brother Thao Vang Lor, Vang, who tried to steal Kowalski's prized possession, his 1972 Gran Torino. The on-screen chemistry between Eastwood and these two young actors is part of what makes Gran Torino become such a compelling and driving force of a movie. Kowalski's journey of self-discovery and widened sense of the world around him is embodied in the friendships he makes with them and their family. Gran Torino, which was written by Nick Schenk from a screenplay by Dave Johansson, is filled with real people and with the gritty realism that comes from the world of everyday hard-working middle-class people, not from some smaltzy heroics or preachy Zen-like characters. If you are an Asian reading this review, or any minority, just replace the slurs. I can only wonder how many times it would take for an ignorant Korean war vet calling you a gook or a slope before you either punched him in the face or asked him to never speak to you again. Gran Torino presents such a man as Clint Eastwood plays Walt Kowalski, an old-school war vet who has seen the neighbors he once knew either move or die away and have since been replaced by a more diverse group of families. Living next door is a family of Hmong immigrants who bring to the surface Walt's prejudice only to be outdone by the Asian, African American and Latino gangbangers now roaming the streets. Of course, this doesn't sit well with Walt, and neither does a foiled attempt by Thao, Vang, the young boy living next door, to steal Walt's '72 Gran Torino as part of a forced gang initiation. The attempted theft and a subsequent get-off-my-grass situation brings Walt closer to his neighbors, but his prejudices are never absent, turning Gran Torino into a film vying for your sympathy for an altogether unsympathetic character. If it works, have you been manipulated? As the film plays on and Walt gets closer to the family living next door, he begins to believe he has more in common with them than he does his own family. The epiphany is meant to show Walt's change in viewpoint, but all it does is prove he has found a soft spot in his heart for the one family living next door. Had he truly found the ability to vanquish all racism, he would not still refer to a young girl named Yua as Yum Yum, and he would most certainly stop with the racial slurs. Gran Torino is only gaining a large amount of attention due to having Eastwood as its star and director, a film that may in fact end up being Eastwood's last turn as an actor. Without Eastwood, this film would be nothing more than a manipulative Lifetime Channel made-for-TV movie, but his involvement elevates it, somewhat. Early on, audiences laugh at Walt's astonishing ability to be ever so ignorant toward everyone he meets. It's hard to believe a man can be this ignorant, and it does incite a comical reaction. However, as the film plays on and Walt just won't quit, even once he becomes supposedly friends with those he is insulting, it begins to make you uncomfortable, primarily because it comes at a time when we are supposed to be watching Walt go through a transformation of sorts. Outside of gook and slope, Walt manages to work in words such as zipperhead, fishhead and spook. I have a problem simply typing the words, and hearing them for over 2 hours isn't much better. If you are able to find some level of comfort in dealing with the film's racist vibe, the acting is a mix of good and awful. Eastwood is fine as a racist ignoramus dealing with his past while confronted with an unanticipated future. His character's fish out of water attitude is very well portrayed, but it is a role portrayed to such a level you would never guess this is an old dog that can learn new tricks. On the other end of the spectrum is Vang as Theo, a young actor simply up against too much, as one final scene opposite Eastwood shows this kid may be able to get pushed around for 90 minutes, but 30 minutes of emotion are beyond his abilities. Annie Her as Theo's older sister Sue is far better than Vang by comparison, but the acting talent definitely belongs to Eastwood as the grouchy growler Walt. Gran Torino is a simple story that carries more weight than it should thanks to Eastwood. It will be judged based on Eastwood's involvement, which may cause some to overlook its flaws and simply lavish praise. However, this film is just as good as it is bad. It's cause and effect. For what makes Eastwood's character so incredibly racist, it causes his mild change of opinion all the less effective. Grizzled Korean War veteran, Clint Eastwood, takes a shine to his neighbor, a young Hmong teenager who tried to steal his car, a 1972 Gran Torino. Gran Torino is an entertaining drama featuring a tour de force performance from director-star Clint Eastwood that almost overcomes the problematic ending. Almost. Eastwood is perfect as the grunting, growling, Walt Kowalski. An angry, frustrated man grieving the loss of his wife and the world he grew up in. He's a man that failed to change with the times, and now finds himself lost in a world he doesn't recognize. It's a tricky role because Walt isn't a very likable guy, but he is one we can come to respect. Eastwood realizes this and plays the part to perfection, dimming his innate charisma early only to let it shine brighter as the film goes on. Surprisingly, the film has a large amount of comedy, much derived from the matter-of-fact racism Walt can't seem to shake even after warming up to his Hmong neighbors. By this point, you realize there's no real vitriol behind the remarks and that Walt really doesn't know any better, but it's here that the film shines, as it comes full circle from the opening, very real and dark, portrayal of racism to this lampooning of its idiocy. But that ending. It's abrupt, heavy-handed. Did he really need to fall in the shape of the cross, in slow motion, and implausible? While you can understand the message Eastwood was trying to send, the execution feels forced. The thing is, I'm not sure how he could have fixed it, just that the ending, as is, doesn't quite work. Gran Torino is definitely a film that I surprisingly enjoyed. You wouldn't think it from the IMDb write-up that doesn't really do it much favors in my opinion. Yet the ratings are high, and after watching I can see why and totally agree with its score. Director and actor, Clint Eastwood plays Walt Kowalski, an aging man who has just lost his wife and must now live alone in a Michigan neighborhood slowly filling with Hmong immigrants. As a veteran of the Korean War, Walt is evidently unimpressed by the invasion, especially when young neighbor Theo, Vang, attempts to steal his prized Gran Torino. You have to expect a high amount of racist comments and slurs, as Walt does not hold back. He does however see right and wrong, and knows something's up when young Theo is harassed by members of a local gang. Clint Eastwood plays a fantastic role, possibly one that suited him all too well. An embittered old man who has lost his wife, he has to deal with the aftermath. His 2 sons and their families are now sniffing around for some inheritance, and his grandchildren are laying claims to his belongings already. To top it off for Walt, the local Reverend, Christopher Carley, is watching over him, as by request of his wife. He is truly irritated with the world, and just wants to sit on his porch and drink his beers in peace. Although highly offensive, I liked the character, who was quite funny with how blunt he could be. It isn't in many films where Clint Eastwood will say to a priest, "I think you're an overeducated 27-year-old virgin who likes to hold the hands of superstitious old ladies and promise them everlasting life." Too funny. It was a fantastic example of a character profile, and throughout the film we see development as Walt finds enjoyment in the community that has formed around him. Unfortunately, the strengths in acting didn't stretch across the whole board of cast. Some seemed to struggle next to Eastwood, and couldn't match him. Some of the lesser actors were a bit off in some scenes, but they seemed new, and I suppose some actors have to start somewhere. For the viewers, we were just lucky to have Eastwood there to raise the bar a bit. In a directing role, it was filmed very well and simply. There were no tricks or complicated shots that would ruin the film. It was truly real and gritty, which made me love it even more. A truly impressive film, that makes you both feel and laugh. Despite the lewd comments, it is truly heartwarming and thought-provoking. It was nice to see bridges being built between two different communities, and a grumpy old man making something of himself whilst leaving his own legacy for others. A fantastic film, comes highly recommended. Very mixed words have been thrown about this movie as of late, whether it be Clint's disaster or Clint's greatest performance or Clint's mediocrity. Gran Torino is Eastwood's most scattered film to date. Written by Nick Schenk, Gran Torino revolves around Walt Kowalski, Clint Eastwood, an American patriot, a Vietnam and Korea veteran. The kicker? Walt's grudge against the Vietnamese, and most other races, has long surpassed an acceptable time. He's become bitter and racist. Filled with coincidences, Nick Schenk's story structure is far too guileless for me to completely love, but a sense of deeper meaning and surprisingly good character development do help make the film's predictable structure much easier to swallow. Unfortunately, his wife has just died, making Walt a much less caring man for several things. The one that stays prevalent throughout the course of the film is his faith in religion. He jabs at Father Janovich, Christopher Carley, about God's flaws whenever they speak, no matter how minimal their chatter may be. More grief strikes the ostensibly emotionless Walt, during the post-mass get-together at his house, a family from Hmong. This family is apparently consisting of Thai and Vietnamese people, predominantly female, which despite Walt's lack of racial acceptance, does play a large part in the development of Walt. And for kicks, to tack on another layer of disappointment, Walt's family thinks him either the white devil or a grumpy old man. For example, his granddaughter wanting him to die so she can gain the rights to his Gran Torino and furniture, and when she get a cold look from her grandfather, she snickers, rolls her eyes and leaves. No consolation for his posthumous loss, just keeping with the cliché, but true idealism of this selfish generation. Additional to this, the fact that she arrived to her grandmother's funeral with skimpy attire that showed navel is beyond insulting and really allows you to picture Walt's daily disappointments. But alas, Walt's family anguish does not end there. His son, Mitch, Brian Haley, and his wife, Karen, Geraldine Hughes, are trying to pressure him into moving to a retirement home. They prompt the suggestion on his birthday, which despite the seething hatred you may have for Walt at this point, you won't be able to feel at least a little bad for him. Humor runs rampant throughout the film. Whether or not you're in the mood to hear 17 different ways of insulting Oriental people is crucial in being fond of this film. Nick Schenk's portrayal of the typical uneducated, elderly racist is as accurate as one could imagine. Apart from this aspect, Gran Torino is like a battered piece of fruit. Some will be optimistic and call it sweeter than imaginable, but some will be pessimistic and throw it out, calling it bitter. Regardless of taste, this film will stick with you, winsome Walt and all. Despite Mr. Kowalski's daily crass routine, he is an earnest man at heart. He believes the man is only as strong as how he's perceived and is admirable by succeeding where few men can. This is all fundamental to the story, as is everything Walt does. After the Hmong people move in, Thao, Vang, goes strolling, minding his own business, only kept company by his school book. A gang of 5 men pull up in a car, giving Thao some unwanted company. Luckily, Thao's older cousin, the street named Spider, Dreama, is with his gang as well, in another car juxtaposed to the situation at hand. Spider's gang pulls up next to the initial, predominantly Latin, gang and the tension jumps tenfold. A man in the back seat of the Latino gang pulls out a Glock, a man in Spider's gang pulls out an Uzi. Needless to say, Spider's gang wins that confrontation. In between the Thao plot and Walt plot, you get a vivid gist of Walt's racial intolerance. Whether it be getting a haircut with his barber Martin, John Carroll Lynch, whom he calls a cheap wop Jew bastard after finding out his haircut is $10, or having a beer with his old pals, delivering perhaps the most blatantly racist joke you'll ever hear, a Mexican, a Jew and a colored guy walk into a bar. The bartender goes, "Get the FCK out of here." The startlingly sincere, but uncomfortably playful delivery of such lines make you believe Walt is a lost cause, but perhaps there is more to it than just that. One fateful afternoon, Spider and his gang approach Thao's house while Thao is outside doing garden work, carefully being watched by his sister, Sue, Annie Her. The gang approaches with the same prep-land procedure. They force Thao to take their initiation test, steal the old neighbor's Gran Torino. That night, Thao attempts to, but Walt's hair trigger reflexes come to their mechanical use. He grabs his M1 Grand and heads to the garage. He catches Thao, but falls. Thao escapes. The next evening, Spider and his gang approach Thao again, but a loud ruckus is stirred up, causing Walt's reactions to generate once again. He runs out of his house, M1 Grand cocked and ready to go, saving Thao and his family from dealing with the gang. Forever grateful, the Lore family, the Hmong people, shower Walt with gifts, and being the bigot he is, he demands they be taken back. When put in a predicament where there is no other option but to accept the gifts, he uses Thao as a scapegoat, saying, "Keep him the FCK off my property," therefore putting everything that has ever happened in the null section. However, Walt takes a liking to Sue soon after. She is with her white, wannabe gangster boyfriend Trey when they are approached by a trio of black men. Walt just happened to be across the street witnessing the possible harm at hand. He debates within himself whether to help a lesser human or to be a man and help a woman in harm's way. He chooses the latter. Saving Sue, they become very close, which opens Walt's eyes to a completely different culture that he slowly begins to embrace, for the tasty food, alcoholic generosity and kind ways. In taking to Sue strongly, he begins to take to Thao as well, bringing them both beneath his visibly sturdy wing, despite the mangled structure beneath. And because of these two neighbors, Walt Kowalski essentially becomes the neighborhood crime fighter, scaring off villains with one mean look and one handgun, not like a Colt .45, but rather like the gun in the picture above. Intimidation and humor are keys to the film's success. With these very compact restrictions, Clint Eastwood delivers his greatest performance to date. His outrageous delivery and his underlying hurt in this role is as iconic as any previous role he's been committed to. Walt Kowalski forces Clint Eastwood to step outside any comfort zone he's ever had and just place everything he's got on the table for all to see. Most will relate to his humor, but there are some that will just be stunned by his ability to mix contained heartache and deeply covered secrets with a front for humor. I am clearly one of these people. Apart from Eastwood, the cast consists of no-named actors, most with minimal, if any, experience. The only performance I really liked apart from Eastwood's was John Carroll Lynch's as the barber. His chemistry with Clint is beautiful, in a disturbingly uneasy and casual way. The two scenes he's in are by far the most light and most enjoyable, but you know that deep down this barber is outraged by Walt's remarks, and that's why Lynch's performance, despite only lasting a few minutes, is appealing to everyone, whether it be finesse lovers or humor lovers. With a fantastic performance, Eastwood also invites two anticipated verbs into the picture, trembling and foreshadowing, two motions Clint is very well known for utilizing more often than not. His subtle use of battle music that plays quietly as Walt seeks intruders and corrupted people, therefore doing a national duty in his eyes, is not only aesthetically pleasing, but also quite distinct. Very rarely do you hear music in a film utilized to give you a deeper perspective of a character, but to that it heighten the mood as well is almost unheard of. Simple things like this make for a more engaging film. Unfortunate for the film, the ending is disparate. There is immense build-up with a lot of possible outcomes, but Nick Schenk took the easy way out and made the ending sentimental. Walt's actions for doing what he does in the closing sequence is noble, if foolish. You'll be pondering why, for many moments after the movie concludes, but you'll only come across a simple psychological explanation that shouldn't sit well with any film fan, especially considering how little evidence that accompanies such an end there is. The finale could have been much more dynamic in execution as well. The ending is very underwhelming to say the least, so if any rewrite was needed for the film to be considered anything more than good, it was certainly the ending. By the end of the film, you should feel one of three things: cheated, sad or happy, depending on how you look at the film, but regardless of how much or how little you appreciate Gran Torino, one thing is for sure, you'll agree that a suitable alternative name for the film could have been Dirty, Old Racist Harry. I am reviewing the movie, Gran Torino, starring Clint Eastwood. This movie was made in 2008, and was produced and directed by Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood plays a Korean war vet named Walt Kowalski. He is a cranky, irritable old man who has little time for the people in his life. His family are not close to him, and he seems to be just a burden. When his wife dies, things only get worse. The only thing he has is his dog. But then Hmong immigrants move next door to him, and things take a turn. At first, it seems for the worst. Walt does not take keenly to them, and makes no attempt to be friendly. When a gang tries to get involved with the family next door, however, Walt intervenes by shoving a shotgun in the gang's faces, saving the young boy next door named Tog. What follows is an unlikely friendship and bond between kid and man, both in pain. I adore this movie. I have always been a fan of Clint Eastwood, but this movie really touched my heart. There are various scenes that involve extensive swearing, which got a little on my nerves, but other than that I really have no complaints about this film. There were times when the young actors playing the Hmong immigrants had trouble acting as well as the previous scenes, but they were all good overall. Clint Eastwood was as amazing as ever. This is a film that is both heartbreaking, humorous, and dramatic. There is something to be learned for everyone in this movie, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. Gran Torino is a film about new beginnings, and the film plays with stereotypes. Although Eastwood has typically played rough or difficult characters, Walt Kowalski is one of the thorniest characters in his entire filmography. Like Jack Nicholson's performance in As Good as It Gets, the film manages to use Eastwood's charm to allow the audience to laugh while watching the character say really horrible, racist things. As audience members, we can laugh about the audaciousness of what he says while not condoning what he says, and the film walks that line. His transition is not overdone, and he retains some of the racist vocabulary while also demonstrating a change in behavior. This lends the character and the story credibility. Gran Torino is extremely well unified at its theme of family relations and community. Walt Kowalski's yuppie sons and grandchildren play like the redneck, white trash family of $1 Million Baby, and it risks derailing the film with overly broad strokes. But this film makes much better use of the characters than $1 Million Baby by using them to show how emotionally estranged Walt has become from his children and how he has more in common with his Hmong neighbors than his own family. Of the Hmong family, there is a pair of terrific performances by Vang as Tao, the teenage boy who Walt takes under his wing, and Annie Her as Sue, Tao's older sister. Both act very naturally, and Vang is especially good at selling the boy's transition and his bond with Walt. Mr. America himself directs us through another piece of film where an angry, old racist, played by Eastwood, obviously, comes to his senses and helps those less fortunate than him. Only the difference between this and every other red, white and blue, Eastwood directed film I've seen is that Gran Torino is actually pretty good. An actor I've always wanted to invest more time in, Eastwood pushes his way through a film that places him on the opposing end of just about everyone around him. I've had Gran Torino recommended to me at numerous times in my life, and it's finally time to get round to it and hunker down into what should be a fairly competent drama. Eastwood's anger throughout the film is consistent, and when we're finally given the salvation necessary to complete his character arc, it feels somewhat underwhelming. There's no denying the emotional weight of the performance, but it does feel rather predictable as it trundles along on its way. Hitting all the expected marks of a drama, it certainly doesn't feel like anything I've seen before given the subject matter. However, it falls into the standard dramatic cliché all too frequently. It's at least well performed, but you should expect nothing less from Eastwood. A film of acceptance, misrepresented as one of American ideals. Acceptance that a new wave was entering into the culture of the world at the time, and the importance of making peace with such a world before it's too late. If anything, we go through the process of Eastwood coming to terms with his own age. He puts himself through some fairly unconvincing scenes of brief action, the glimmers of Dirty Harry shining through, but without the immediately harsh effect they used to present. He seems fragile, distant even, as he directs himself through a performance that suits his acting abilities but also suffers at the hands of a man trying to keep himself in the loop of action-oriented filmmaking. An emotionally provocative film, one that does feel rather smug in its appropriation and tone, but at the same time it provides us with a credibly enjoyable Eastwood performance and proof that there's more than violence to his well-versed acting background. At times tragic for all the wrong reasons, and with a handful of subplots that are completely submerged and forgotten about by the time Gran Torino wraps itself up, it's a film that certainly lacks the conjecture to provide anything completely solid or satisfying, but it's certainly great to see Eastwood give a fine performance with relative ease. Walt Kowalski sits on his porch all day drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon and scowling at his cook neighbors. When he's not doing that, he's fixing things around his house, located in a neighborhood that has become predominantly inhabited by Hmong families. Sometimes he wheels out his 1972 Gran Torino and polishes it, having helped build the machine on the original assembly line. He's a Korean War veteran, a retired Ford plant auto worker, and a cantankerous old racist. And he'll stake a proud claim to any of those points. Clint Eastwood plays Walt in his latest directorial effort, Gran Torino, a film with surprising sensitivity and humanity, despite the dogged nature of its main character. Eastwood plays the role with appropriate growls and snarls, fervent comebacks, and harsh truth-telling. He's the type of character who cares more about defending the boundaries of his lawn than what's happening to the outside world. But there's little out there for him to care about. His wife has just died, and his witless son, Brian Haley, has suggested Walt move into a senior assisted living resort, which, as you can imagine, doesn't go over too well. Walt is not a religious man either, though he's perpetually hounded by Father Janovich, Christopher Carley, who made a promise to Walt's late wife to watch over him. The last thing Walt wants to feel is incapable of looking after himself. Next door, the Hmong family sees him as an old rooster that doesn't know when to give in. Since he calls them every name in the book from chink to egg roll, it's no wonder they wish he'd leave. But Walt marked his territory long ago, and he's not about to abandon a staked claim. So when the quiet teenage neighbor boy Thao, Vang, is reluctantly enlisted into his cousin's gang of Hmong thugs, they tell him to steal Walt's Gran Torino for his initiation. Walt catches him in the act and probably would have killed him, except he slipped and the boy got away. Thao's sensible and bright sister Sue, Annie Her, brings her awkward brother over to apologize, offering his services to Walt to make amends by way of chores and such. Walt agrees, albeit grudgingly, and finds himself mentoring Thao. What proceeds is a testament to Eastwood's charisma as an actor and his dramatic sensitivity as a filmmaker. After all, having directed nearly 30 pictures in as many years and starred in many more for the last 50, Eastwood has a profound grasp of dramaturgy. This is particularly true in his last few years since Mystic River, moving through $1 Million Baby and his Iwo Jima diptych of Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, where Eastwood has composed himself with such artistry and patience in his filmmaking tone. He never intrudes on the story, never allows his presence behind the camera to be known in front of it. He's a selfless artist, and how many artists can make that claim? Audiences might expect the plot to enter Dirty Harry territory, as the gang attempting to initiate Thao persists, and who better to eliminate an unwanted gang than Dirty Harry? But now that Walt has identified with his neighbors, Asian though they may be, they're under his wing. And so, perhaps Eastwood's Dirty Harry persona does rear its ugly head, complete with lips unfurling to reveal clenched-jawed speeches. But not in the manner we'd expect. This isn't a film about violent acts of retribution. Instead, it's about seeing your neighbors as human beings, too, no matter how different their religions or racial profiles or upbringings may be. Indeed, Walt Kowalski remains a foul-mouthed bigot for the full procession of the film, but he also identifies more with the unity and family values of the Mongs next door than his own family, who are just waiting for Walt to die so they can hear who gets what in the will reading. Eastwood, supposedly in his last acting role, combines his hard-edged guise of yesteryear, the stuff of Dirty Harry and the man with no name, with his more recent humanity. The result delineates the transformation of a movie figure that used to blow people's faces off, but now he prefers to understand them. Gran Torino is a nuanced picture with incredible heart, humor, and melodramatic themes of acceptance and long overdue redemption. The story is told in simple terms without resorting to grand metaphors and preaches open-mindedness for your fellow Americans, race notwithstanding. Walt Kowalski draws his world in crass caricature as he deals with and disengages from the people around him. Walt's priest is, in Walt's view, a 27-year-old virgin who peddles superstition. His grandchildren are spoiled, disrespectful layabouts. The Asian Americans who dominate his Detroit area neighborhood? Merely an amalgamation of epithets: chinks, gooks, zipperheads. Don't think he spares himself, though. In the mirror, Walt sees an old-school Polish crank, a grizzled Korean war vet who wears his scowl like a medal. Burdened by his own unspoken past, he has no patience for people, no time for fools, and all people are fools. His heart has room for only his dearly departed wife, his dog, Daisy, and his pristine, polished, 1972 Gran Torino. Then the fatherless Lore family moves in next door. At first, Walt welcomes them as he welcomes everyone, with a fearsome frown and an armful of disdain. But when Thao Lore, one of the family's two teenagers, gets entangled with a local Asian gang, Walt's forced to get involved. First, Thao tries to steal Walt's Torino as part of the gang's initiation. Then, when the burglary fails, the gang tries to assimilate Thao anyway. Members show up on the Lore porch and try to kidnap the boy, leading to an angry struggle in front of Walt's house. Walt storms through his front door and points a rifle at the gang members. "Get off my lawn," he hisses. And thus Walt becomes an unwilling neighborhood hero. The Asian community blankets his porch with gifts, and Thao's sister, Sue, invites him over for a barbecue. The neighborhood led by the Lore family begins to wrap its arms around the grumpy old man, and, as a result, Walt's heart slowly makes space for some new residents. Walt learns that his neighbors aren't Chinks, they're Hmong, a people from Southeast Asia who relocated to America after the Vietnam War. He becomes acquainted with their customs, develops a fondness for their food and, slowly, almost unwillingly, an affection for them. Perhaps for the first time in a long while, Walt seems to be home. "I have more in common with these gooks than my own spoiled, rotten family," he tells himself. In turn, Sue tells Walt, "You're a good man." And though Walt denies it, Sue's right. Cranky though he may be, Walt spends a lot of time helping out, fixing the Lore's sink, repairing their ceiling fan, and saving their children from all manner of gang-related threats. While he takes a quick liking to Sue, a feisty fireball who calls him Wally, he has little regard for quiet Thao, until he watches Thao help a neighbor pick up some groceries she spilled. Eventually the two become friends, and then something that more closely resembles family. Through their relationship, we learn that the Lors and Walt do indeed have a lot in common, both treasure tradition and old-fashioned values. Neither tolerate disrespect or excuse the behavior of street gangs. Gran Torino's first scene takes place in a church, and Walt is a Catholic. But his is a reluctant faith, if it's really there at all. When his priest, Father Janovich, encourages him to go to confession, Walt says, "I confess I never cared for church much." He mocks the priest for claiming to understand life and death, and when Janovich notes that better men than Walt have been helped through confession and faith, Walt agrees and then callously splices the F word into the middle of Hallelujah. After Walt tells the Hmong gang to get off his lawn, Janovich asks him why he didn't just call the police. "I prayed that they would show up," Walt replies coyly, but nobody answered. Yet Walt does eventually go to confession, and we learn that he's also willed his house to the church because, he says, that's what his late wife would want done. After the gang attacks the Lore house, Walt solicits advice from Janovich on what to do. And when Janovich suspects that Walt may try to violently take out the gang once and for all, the priest calls the cops and waits in front of the gang's house for hours in an effort to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. He leaves only when the police force him to. When Walt asks Sue how the Hmong came to live in Detroit, she tells them the Lutherans helped her people relocate to America. Everybody blames the Lutherans, Walt says. But the Lores are not Lutheran, they still adhere to a shamanistic belief system connected to, or perhaps synonymous with, Taoism. Walt catches a glimpse of a ceremony where participants cut the head off a chicken. Audiences see a shaman bless a newborn child during a ceremony in the Lore living room. The shaman also tosses what appears to be a cleaved horn carved with symbols on the floor. And he later reads Walt's personality. Sue informs Walt that it's rude to touch a Hmong person on the head, for it is there where the Hmong believe the soul resides. Sue is propositioned by 3 random gangbangers who spout lewd, nasty comments. One of her assailants suggestively grabs his crotch. Taunting Thao, a guy makes obscene sexual motions. Walt admits, in confession, that he once kissed another woman in 1968, despite the fact that he was married at the time. Walt's granddaughter showcases her pierced navel by wearing a revealing top to her grandmother's funeral. Walt's barber holds a pornographic magazine. The only thing worse than killing a person, Walt tells us, is getting a medal for it. He knows of what he talks. Walt stores a silver star in an old war chest, a memento from his time in Korea. He tells Thao he killed 13 men during the war, maybe more, and sometimes mentions the terrible things he did, including killing people with shovels and using bodies as sandbags. "Not a day goes by where I don't think about it," he tells Thao. "You don't want that on your soul." Yet Walt rarely leaves his guns. He brandishes a rifle to encourage the gang to get off his lawn, and he points a pistol at another set of gangbangers who are bothering Sue. When the Hmong gang accosts Thao and grinds a lighted cigarette into his cheek, Walt uncovers the gang's hangout and beats up one of its members. Violence tends to beget violence, and the gang retaliates by shooting up the Lore's house. Thao is grazed by a bullet, and raping Sue. We don't witness the sexual assault, we do see its aftermath. Sue staggers into her house, face bruised and bloodied, streaks of dried blood on her legs. This makes Walt even angrier, and he tears through his kitchen, knocking holes in his cabinets and bloodying his knuckles. He contemplates his next move. Whatever it is, he declares, they won't have a chance. The next day, we see Walt's kitchen table weighted with weapons. I'll save what happens next for my conclusion. Watch for the spoiler warning, but rest assured, there is gunfire, and not everyone survives. Elsewhere, several other characters brandish weapons, including Walt's barber. Gran Torino earns its R right here, with characters uttering the F word nearly 75 times and the S word another 25. Jesus' name is misused about 20 times, a few times by the priest, and God's name is paired with D, and another half dozen. Other curses pop up with regularity, but perhaps the most assaulting language consists of racial epithets. Walt casts countless slurs, many of which, frankly, I'd never even heard before. Walt smokes a lot, even though several people ask him to quit. His favorite pastime is sitting on his front porch, smoking and drinking Blue Ribbon beer. Several empty cans are typically stacked beside him, while he watches the world speed by. But the smoking, the film suggests, has caught up to the old man. We see Walt cough up blood several times, the insinuation being that he has lung cancer. He refuses to go to the hospital to find out definitively. Walt also catches his granddaughter sneaking a cigarette. Walt and the lore grandmother chew and spit tobacco. Several other characters drink, most notably Father Janovich. It's implied that the lore's underage children and their friends drink, too. Walt never really connected with his natural family. And the whole Kowalski clan seems to be at fault for this. Walt may be a crusty old codger, but his sons and grandchildren all steer an unflattering course through Gran Torino. One son calls Walt to, ostensibly, see how he's doing, even though his real purpose is to snag some football tickets. Walt accuses a daughter-in-law of pawing through his wife's jewelry. The grandkids dress inappropriately, behave poorly, and one asks on the day of her grandmother's funeral if Walt would will her his Gran Torino. When Walt's grandsons rifle through Walt's trunk of Korean War mementos, without permission, one asks another, "Where's Korea?" I'll begin my conclusion with a spoiler warning. I'm not fond of giving away big plot twists, but when morality and ethics are woven into them, there's little choice about whether or not they should be dealt with in a plugged-in online review. And director Clint Eastwood has, both to his credit and detriment, developed a well-known habit for weaving worldview issues into his movies. After his sister is raped, Thao is out for blood. He charges over to Walt's house and the two prepare, seemingly, for an assault on the gang's lair. Eastwood is setting us up for a Dirty Harry-style finale. But Walt doesn't trundle down that well-worn path, a path we've already seen him take more than once. Instead, he leads Thao to his basement, gives the boy his silver star and slyly locks him in, so that Walt can confront the gang alone. He stands at the gang's front porch, then cocks his finger and thumb, pointing and shooting at each member in turn. He scolds them for their immorality, their inhumanity. And then, as he reaches into his jacket pocket to pull out a lighter, the gang guns him down. Walt falls down dead, clothes riddled with bullet holes, arms splayed out as if waiting for an embrace. The act is part suicide, part sacrifice, a riff on a theme Eastwood explored in $1 Million Baby. But if Baby emphasized the suicide, Torino dwells on the sacrifice in this case, a deeply meaningful one. Due to Walt's selfless act, gang members are sent to prison for murder. That frees the Lore family, and, by extension, the neighborhood, from their torment and abuse. As a piece of thought-provoking, cinematic art, Gran Torino is near brilliant. In this taut, 2-hour tale, Eastwood grapples with some of life's biggest questions: what is family? What makes a man? How can we fight evil when evil doesn't follow the rules? These questions are complex, valid, and far too important to let one movie, no matter how well made, answer them for you. This film should spark struggle, not certitude in its audience. Gran Torino has a car full of content issues. And they shouldn't be overlooked. The aftermath of a rape. Beatings. Shootings. Obscenities. Abuses of Jesus' name. Racial insults. But they don't entirely obscure the lingering questions. This is a haunting morality play, where characters grapple with eel-like ethical conundrums and search, in the end, for a bit of inner peace. This film. Directed by Clint Eastwood. Screenplay by Nick Schenk. Story by Dave Johansson. Produced by Clint Eastwood. Starring Clint Eastwood. Cinematography Tom Stern. Edited by Joel Cox. Music by Kyle Eastwood. Production companies Warner Brothers. Pictures. Distributed by Warner Brothers. Pictures. Release date December 12, 2008. Running time 116 minutes. Countries United States. Languages English. Budget $25 to $33 million. Box office $270 million.